Okay, this should be episode 65 of Summoning Insight. As always, sponsored by a site called Alpha Draft. Now, if you're like me, you live life in the fast lane, aggressive, diving in where you don't always belong, but trying to seize the day, causing those around you to say, oh my god, then you might want to play at Alpha Draft, where you can play fantasy esports. You can sandbag like I do and try and make a swag jar, pick purposely bad players, and fuck around and try and lose because it's funnier if you win then. Or you could experiment like Chao Gu apparently did. You could pick weird lineups that don't really make sense, but if you do so, maybe it'll make you better at gambling somehow and knowing people to pick that are bad. I still don't know how that one worked. I still don't know. Maybe someone will explain it to me one day. Either way, you can play in international competition. You might lose. If you win, then you tell everyone how great you are. And if you lose, then much like on Alpha Draft, just don't bring it up. We don't talk about the losses, okay? So that's Alpha Draft for you. So now we're into the show. It's episode 65. I'm Thorin, as usual. And my regular co-host, Monte Cristo. How is the off-season treat you, Monty?
It's so lovely, full of rumors and roster trades, and you could also talk about Chao Gu selling out to newbie like we do with Alpha Draft every week. You know, there's another like parallel you got there at the Chinese scene.
See, the obvious joke, Monty, is that those of us who aren't Chinese analysts knew that Chao Gu were newbies all along. Oh. There we go. Okay, so our guest this week is actually Kelsey Moser, even though her Twitter name to this day says Karen Moser, but we call her Kelsey Moser. So maybe she's sandbagging with her name there, just experimenting, trying something different, you know, just trying to set the expectations.
She's not actually the Chinese analyst experimenting with her name right now. There's actually another one of those.
Oh, okay. Right. I don't know who you're referring to there, Monty. I don't know who you're referring to, because quite frankly, you know, I haven't seen any of the other Spawn or something. I'm not sure anyway. So Kelsey is a writer for The Score Esports. And you know, she's really productive now. She does lots of articles, but that's because, much like Bane in Batman and The Dark Knight Returns, that was actually Dark Knight Rises, much like he was incredibly strong and very determined and driven by his philosophy, because we thought the backstory was that he'd climbed, I'm not going to give any spoilers here, that he'd climbed out of this pit, you know, that took incredible mental fortitude and will and like drive to get out of there. Much like that, Kelsey actually started out in the salt mines of LoL Esports, where she was literally limited in thought, word, and deed, and indeed character length. And so she had to work within those shackles, but she trained herself up so that now that she's finally unleashed, much like when I was unleashed from On-Gamers, she's now become ubiquitous and unstoppable in many ways. At least that's how she describes herself to me. So welcome to the show, Kelsey.
Naturally, in our many private conversations, I'm very happy to talk myself up. So there you go.
Okay. So third appearance on the show, I believe. Well, it might be more because you might have done some of the predictions episodes, but I think third real appearance.
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously, I've got a question for you. How do you actually describe yourself in terms of, if you had to divide it up into regions, do you actually call yourself a Chinese analyst before that term became a dirty thing?
I kind of, I guess. I'm writing a lot more Europe stuff, but obviously China takes up a lot of time. Just to get information can be difficult, so I probably still spend most of my time covering China stuff, but I try to be more even when there's information to cover the European scene, and I try to make contacts and things like that. So yeah, probably still a Chinese enthusiast or analyst or whatever you would say, and dabbling in Europe, as it were.
That's actually one thing that triggers me a bit, Monty. You know, to this day, that Kelsey will never describe herself as an expert on the basis that some of the people in China obviously know more than her because they don't have to translate articles. And so because she doesn't have perfect knowledge of everything about China, she will not describe herself as an expert. Now, as someone who most certainly does not have perfect knowledge on actually anything, but considers himself an expert on many things, please put her right on. What she's missing something here, right? You just have to have the gist of it and do your best, right? And then you can consider yourself an expert. Is it like that, Monty?
Is it like...
How does expertise work? Explain it to me.
Well, I think expert is something that other people have to give to you. So,
Okay.
I mean, other people can call me an expert, but I'm not doing so at this point in time.
See, you say that, Kelsey, but actually, here's what happened, okay? In CSGO, we used to have a term for people on the analysis desk, you probably guessed it, analyst, right? And that used to be that was the industry standard term, and every event I did, I would be called an analyst, and then, Anders and Semmel in CSGO would be commentators. So what I started doing was, I changed my Twitter description and just decided, I mean, these awards, there's no official consensus. So I just put world's leading CSGO expert and just thought, fuck it, I win. I write my own reviews. And here's the best part. At the last event I did, they listed everyone else on the docket who was doing the same job as me as analyst. And for me, they put expert. I win,
nice.
Kelsey. I win. That's what you do. You shape reality to your own opinions and needs. Again, this is where I'd want Monty to jump in, but he feels disconnected right now. I don't know what's going on here. Communication barriers broken down.
Well, hey, I'm not here to call you a CSGO expert, considering I don't know anything about CSGO really, so I can't unfortunately verify you on this.
See, now all of the people watching the show can't relate to you at all, Monty, because they aren't experts, yet they are exactly the chosen people to decide who are experts. So again, they can't relate to that, They're exactly the people who would know. I mean, who better to decide who an expert is than someone who knows extremely little about the subject and has no experience?
I mean, from what I've learned in League of Legends, being an analyst, then we actually don't have the approval of the professional players, because only apparently professional players can actually have knowledge about the game, if I'm to believe many people, that the Twitter analysts simply can't exist in any way, shape, or form. So
actually, I have to say, one thing that I've noticed is an interesting phenomenon is the big problem about player statements, especially along these lines. Like, for example, if you make a statement about a team, okay, and you say, oh, they play this way, or they obviously have this sort of strategy, a player in isolation can come out and go, that's totally false, that's speculation, the person's made it up. And the problem is, people just take that at face value. There's never any follow-up, there's never any grilling of them, because here's the issue. I've had that happen many times from Counter-Strike, where the player said that, and so the people went, oh, I guess he's just wrong then. But what's funny is, sometimes the things I'd heard internally in the team came from that player's teammate, like, right at the exact same point in time. So if you could even ask a follow-up question, that would immediately fall away. Sadly, in League of Legends, if you notice, the big problem is players who don't do interviews love Twitter. Because here's the thing, the fact that it's only 140 characters means they never have to explain themselves. They just make a statement, there's no follow-up, maybe there's 2 tweet replies, and that's it, they're out. It's 500 words and they're out. So it's ideal for those people. Whereas if you really wanted to exert your expertise and the fact that you know more than someone, as you would obviously know, Monty, with a long-form show like this, you want as much time as possible, because then the other person's going to fall apart. They're going to start saying sandbagging and shit. You're going to be in your element like, I've got hours of this to go. So, let's go and talk about the Chinese region here, Kelsey. Okay. Now, sadly, I've scheduled this show too late now. You've made me realise the error of my ways. This should have been scheduled about a month ago, because it was building up inside you. That steam was getting ready. You needed to vent it somewhere. So sadly, you made a video of your own, where you sort of, I wouldn't even say passive aggressively, you just sort of like, in a really long-winded, verbose way, explained all the things that you're really upset with about Monty, but not to Monty, just to a fictional Monty who's not called Monty. And again, may I stress, it wasn't to Monty, but they all sounded awfully like his opinions and things that he said on that episode when Emily was on. So let's get into some of these issues, and I want to actually understand your position overall. So first of all, I know one problem that is an issue with Chinese analysts is people just like lump you all together and assign all the same opinions to all of them. So for example, they think every Chinese analyst is like a huge fan of Invictus Gaming, and every Chinese analyst thinks that like Uzi Eyes, whatever the opinion is, they think that they all have the same. So let's just start at the top here.
Okay.
What is your actual opinion on the whole Xiaogu lane swap experimentation thing?
My actual opinion on the QG lane swap thing is that I think that they were pretty bad at lane swapping and continue to be pretty bad at lane swapping, but and this is the conversation that I had with Emily, where she talked about, where we were both talking about why they were lane swapping in these particular times. I kind of noticed that they had a larger tendency to lane swap in their first games. So I came up with the possibility that, hey, maybe they're saying, let's just lane swap every first game, because there was like a few successive weeks where they would just lane swap every first game. So I thought maybe they had potentially identified that they were not so good at lane swapping, so they were just going to practice it regardless of the circumstance. I don't think that they went in and said, oh, this is a bad time to lane swap. We should lane swap here and try to see how we do in this lane swap situation. I don't think they did that. Okay. I think it was just something that they identified they were losing in these situations, and they decided to practice them more without really understanding when was a good time to lane swap and when was a bad time to lane swap. You also saw kind of that they lost a lot of first games as a result of that. They had a much higher win rate in second games, things like this. So, I mean, it's something to posit. I don't think that they necessarily definitely did that. I haven't asked them about it, but this is like kind of the way that I saw this.
So here's the weird thing about that. That's a much more articulate and reasonable postulation than the notion that they purposely picked the bad lane. That's the part that I found weird, okay, with the way she presented. I don't know if she miscommunicated what she meant by that. Maybe she meant something different by purposely did it or purposely experiment with bad lane swaps. But the part I still don't get is this. Why would you always lane swap on the same game? I mean, didn't we have that? Was it on this show, actually, where we had that? Maybe it was in an interview. Sometimes they blur together. Where someone said that when World Elite, like, pioneered lane swap action, the problem was they would always do it every time, and therefore everyone just learned, like, oh, they will always lane swap. And so everyone, like, the massive advantage they would have had by being the first to be really good at the lane swap was actually taken away because everyone just knew they were going to do it. So what do you think the logic of that is? Because, again, if you're going to practice a lane swap, you want to do it in real circumstances. Is that not the case?
I don't necessarily think that, yeah. I mean, I agree with you that makes more logical sense. I think that there's definitely an issue with prep for matches in China, where instead of saying, okay, we're against this team, so it would be a good time to lane swap because they do this, this, and this, it's more like they don't necessarily prepare for specific matches every single week or things like this, so they're just going to try something this game. They realize that it really sucks, so okay, we better play standard lane so we can at least stay even in our points and get 1 point from this best of two because we lost the first game to this terrible lane swap. So I can see why that logic would come into play, where they said, okay, we have more liberty to try something in the first game, and if we lose whatever, we can still split even and win the second game and try to win the second game. So
have they ever addressed any of this in actual interviews or anything? Has there been any hints towards this?
I haven't, not specifically with QG, but I do have talked to Ever Gaming, LGD, and for example, Godv, Whalus, Pain Evil, whatever he wants to go by right now.
The Proscorin of the LPL world in many ways. In many ways. Fantastic in China, not loved as much around the world. Anyway, continue.
But he said that because, I mean, I could get the direct quote, but I'm just going to paraphrase. He said that because scrim results don't mean anything, or scrims don't mean anything, we're more likely to try different things in LPL games. So I think that there's just this general perception among some teams that scrims don't really matter and you shouldn't really try. And you heard it with the Spirit interview, right? Spirit also said that about WE, is that they were just like completely trolling scrims, so there was almost no point to playing scrims. Edward Gaming, when they were first formed, their manager said, we're very grateful to the LSPL teams because the LSPL teams actually really care about scrims and they want to beat us and they want to win. So to get really good, we played LSPL teams. This is a problem that's been in the Chinese League of Legends community for a while, I think. And I'm really actually glad that they got punished for it this year, because I don't think in previous years, like, they had the same problem and they still managed to do fairly well at international competition.
What do you think of this, Monty? The notion that they're not practicing properly or even necessarily prepping for specific teams that are coming up this week, etc.?
I mean, if it's true, I have no way to verify this. I think it's really pathetic, and that's not the way that you should practice or play as a professional sports team. And why the hell are they doing this? And what the hell is their infrastructure and coaching staff doing during these times? How can do they have zero control over their players? It's actually pathetic. It's pathetic.
Yeah,
Kelsey,
that is kind of like that. That's pretty true, actually.
So here's my question.
For not all teams, okay? I'm not going to name any specific ones, but I do know that control for coaching staff and management is not really tight in a lot of
But here's the
teams.
problem. Some of these teams have Korean coaches.
Yes.
They don't implement a Korean style of practice.
There was actually a really interesting interview done by Ryan Lui with OMG after this split that talked about the Korean coaches and the fact that the team and the Korean coaches had a really hard time communicating on what was effective and what worked well for the team, because stuff that OMG used to do a lot previously was, after a game, they just get really mad and they'd argue with each other. I don't know, be sort of aggressive, point out things that were wrong, and then they'd be okay with it and try to prepare for the next games. But the Korean coach, didn't like that they were having these aggressive behavior, didn't really understand what was going on, partly because of the language barrier. And so he tried to do a lot more one-on-ones with them, and so the players felt isolated and all the animosity and things like that went worse. This is just one case study example, but I do think that there's an issue with Korean coaches and Chinese players. People talk about language barriers all the time, but they're typically focusing on in-game issues with the language barriers and communicating about how to set up the lane swap as you load into game and who to prioritize in team fights. But I think some of the bigger issues are actually outside of the game and resolving problems between players and coaching staffs that can't really talk to each other efficiently all the time. So I think that that's something that has been a problem, is that Korean coaches have different expectations of what the Chinese players will do, and the Chinese players have very different expectations of what the Korean coaching staffs will do. So if for example, you're a Chinese player and you've been playing in this type of environment we talk about, with maybe the practice structure isn't necessarily completely enforced, management isn't cracking down as well if you don't perform as well, these sorts of things. If that's the case, then a Korean coach comes in, and Korean coach is probably more used to Korean infrastructure, where if players don't listen to you, they get kicked or benched, or they just listen to, right? So it's kind of hard to rectify these expectations. So you see a lot of Korean coaches who you think might be really effective, like a bunch of the Samsung coaches came to coach Team King, which later became Royal Never Give Up. They came to coach Team King, and Team King actually ended up declining considerably over time. And it wasn't the coaching staff's fault. It was just weird mishmash of things, I think.
Have you heard anything in the Korean scene, Monty? Because if there's all these people who are making the exodus to China, I know the main thing they mainly say is the food. It is not Korean food. The food, again, with the food, it's not Korean food. I know these are brilliant interview answers, but is there a sense in the Korean scene for what happens when you go to China in that way?
I mean, you have to understand that for whatever reason, Koreans are very preoccupied with their food. I mean, you and I know Korean food is wonderful. I mean, it's great to be in Korea. It's very good. But there is a very big fixation on Korean food among Koreans, and seemingly an inability to cope without it, which I find very interesting, considering I don't have really an attachment to American food or whatever. Sometimes it's nice to have difference in cuisine, but I like being Korean, eating a bunch of Korean food all the time. It really doesn't bother me. So I do find it a little bit odd. But I actually do think that's a very legitimate complaint for many Koreans, is the access to that food is actually much more important than many Westerners or people from other cultures would really identify with, I would say.
It's also really interesting talking to Chinese players and Chinese journalists and things like that. When they go to Korea, they don't like the food there either. So it goes both ways, I guess. So that they become preoccupied with their food when they're competing in Korea, things like that. So.
Okay, so if you don't think you're an expert on Chinese League of Legends, you spent the last fucking 4 years studying, then get ready for this one, Kelsey, because now I'm going to get you to attempt to break down an entire national identity and culture. Not in my style, not akin to how I do it. I've got my own flair, But the question is, the notion is, okay, that in Asia, these societies lead to people being very dedicated and driven and blah, 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 all the stuff that we assign to Koreans. But there's clearly something different about the Chinese in this particular aspect, because it's true. Obviously, there are many jobs in China where people work incredible hours and they have to work very hard. Right. But is there something different in how it works with pro gamers, do you think?
So this is a really dicey topic, because I don't want to necessarily, put my foot in my mouth. I think that whatever the issue was before was exacerbated. So I'm just going to focus on one aspect of it, because I think that there are probably a bunch of cultural things that I can't specifically touch on. But whatever the issue was before is somewhat exacerbated by the ballooning of the streaming culture. For example, one thing people don't know is that a lot of these Koreans who come to China, they aren't necessarily being paid. Their big salaries aren't really being paid by the esports organizations. They're being paid by the streaming platforms. So the streaming platform goes to, let's say, LGD, for example, and they say, we really think, well, LGD wants Marin, and the streaming platform says, okay, I think Marin would be a good streamer for us. We'll pay a considerable portion of his salary, things like that. So I think that the streaming platforms coming in, providing these salaries at lower risk to esports organizations, make it so that players can stream a lot or all these sorts of things, or maybe not even stream that much because they'll be given their salary anyway, and then they aren't necessarily in danger of being punished because the responsibility for paying them or their performance isn't necessarily on the organizations completely. This is just one theoretical thought that I've had, especially with the recent decline of the Chinese teams relative to what they've done even within this year. I don't think, again, this isn't true of every single team, but this is something that I think has made existing problems worse. In terms of the Chinese work ethic before this, I don't know. I think it was just something where they could sort of get by and win. And so they didn't necessarily work really, because you see it in the LSPL teams, actually. People talk about the work ethic of the LSPL teams actually being better. And when they want to scrim higher level teams, but when they get into the big LPL, or it's almost like the accountability goes away and the self-motivation goes away a little bit, and they just kind of play for the game instead of the scrims.
Okay. But doesn't this whole streaming platforms paying a large portion of the salaries just make a very awkward, unsustainable situation? Because basically, in order to see a return, the streaming platform would have to have the pro players stream a lot. Ergo, they wouldn't actually be scrimming or practicing as a team that much, and they would have to be a streamer. And if they don't stream enough and they're more practicing on the team, doesn't the streaming platform then not get value for the salary and then not have any motivation to continue that sponsorship?
So the really interesting thing I've learned about streaming platforms in China over the course of trying to figure it out this offseason, and the reason why it's still kind of ballooning and still kind of going, is because streaming in China is actually very unique in that it's even big. It's not endemic to gaming or anything like that. Because of the way that television and streaming interact in China, television is censored or controlled. What you can put on a television channel is controlled by the Chinese government and censored in that case. And it's not necessarily just, if you're saying things against the Chinese government, you can't put this on. According to an article I read in The Economist, they can limit things, like you aren't allowed to watch Doctor Who because it depicts time travel. And that's expressly that's
Listen, Monty, they don't want anyone thinking that you can go back in time before good old General Mao got in power and do anything like that. I don't even want that idea to exist, Monty. As long as people know that there's only one way that time goes, it's incredibly slow, and it goes 1 second at a time forwards. That's all you need to know, citizen. Okay? Also, ironically, of course, if we could go back in time, we could fix all of China last year. So if only time travel, if only Doctor Who was true, Kelsey. I know I've got a scarf on right now. I am British, but that's where the similarities end. So.
But see, I don't understand this because if time travel's banned, then how could they import Looper?
Oh, I have no idea. Okay.
And ironically, spoilers, Looper did kill himself in many ways. See what I did there? See what I did there? Okay, keep going. Anyway, for a lot of money, by the way.
No one is really sure exactly why. Like, some speculation is the government just didn't expect streaming to get big. Okay. But they distribute licenses to the owners of the streaming platforms and the companies, and the licenses, as long as you have the license, you can dictate what you can put on your own channel. So if a Chinese person wants to stream Doctor Who, for example, on a stream, and the person who owns the streaming platform is okay with it, then they can stream Doctor Who.
So you know something, Monty? Let's give the Chinese government a little bit of credit here. Like, if you get a license, you can stream whatever you want, you know. I mean, they are a totalitarian government in some ways, but they're not as crazy as to tell you what you could stream, you know, like what game to stream or limit your expression that way. They're not unreasonable, you know. They're not tyrants, you know. They're still trying to manage society, you know. Have a little bit of liberty out there. Everyone who just started watching League of Legends the last 6 months has no clue what I'm talking about, but that's the usual audience for the show, Monty. So let's continue. I've got a question here, Kelsey.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a rough idea of how much the big stars in the LPL actually stream? Like, how much does someone like Def stream or Uzi Eye?
It actually depends a lot. I know that the Chinese players tend to stream more because their contracts actually tend to be less salary based and more based on how much they actually stream, which I don't know why they wouldn't do that for the Koreans as well. The Koreans, I think, stream considerably less just because their streaming contracts do tend to be salary based. I think that the general contract requirement is 80 hours a month.
Jesus.
But that doesn't necessarily
that's
mean that
actually
they do that.
Huge amount for a professional player. I would say that just, for example, for Renegades, we require our players to do 40. So that is fully double.
Right. So
That's a
again, not all players actually stream that much, but a lot of the contracts that I've seen or heard of have 80 in them. So yeah.
So this is what's funny. I've actually got
an extraordinary amount for somebody who's expected to practice.
I've actually got a good reference point that some people who haven't followed other esports games won't actually know, which is one of the reasons which people never really address that much in StarCraft 2 as to why the most successful Western team in terms of income was Evil Geniuses, but why they actually had quite an underwhelming record of results is because they would sign people who were fantastic players in tournaments, right? And basically what would usually happen was, if you were a Westerner and you won a big tournament, they would almost certainly come and give you an offer to join Evil Geniuses, right? But when you were the Westerner winning the tournament, all you did is practice to be good at StarCraft. You would play ladder, you would play tournaments, and you could get better. But when you joined Evil Geniuses, part of what gave you a phenomenal salary, what actually looked like an inflated salary, it might be like 2 or 3 times more than you made before, so in some cases even more, is that you weren't just being signed to be a great 1v1 player and win tournaments. You were actually being signed to play those tournaments, but all the time you weren't playing the tournaments, you had a streaming set of hours. So it would be something like 40 hours a month on top of trying to practice. So even though people never usually looked at this, most of the great players who joined EG actually gradually went downhill. They became less successful in tournaments. And I can't imagine this correlation has nothing to do with it. It might not be the only reason. Like, for example, it's true also when you get a fantastic salary, some people might not be as hungry to win anymore. They might have already accomplished something. They might just be working more on the media side of things. But I think this has to at least be a background to it, because as you will find out, sadly, even in the area of competitive video gaming, it's very few people who really can just play like 14 or 16 hours a day. Those people are like mutants, like the Flashes of the world, or Faker, or Froggen. These are very unique people. Even within games like that, you have players, I notice in the West, where people are like, this guy isn't dedicated. I'm like, mate, he plays 9 hours a day. He's been playing for 3 years. That's pretty fucking dedicated. What have you guys who are watching the show ever done for 9 hours a day? Even when you go to work for 9 hours a day, you slack off and you look on fucking Facebook. He has to actually play a game and try and get better 9 hours. So it's to actually play that much, it's going to burn you out. It's going to be a detriment to you in the long run. When did the Chinese streaming thing really kick off, Kelsey? Was it actually like prevalent in 2014 that they had to do these hours and stuff?
I think it started to really ramp up speed was like mid 2014. It's just grown in terms of gaming in particular. It's just grown astronomically since then. Like, I swear there's a new streaming platform that comes out, once a day, and then UZI has switched from Douyu to Panda TV to this new one, Quantum or something, in like the course of a couple months. So it's really hard to say exactly when it started to get big. It's just that we know that the main growth has happened over the past year and a half. So,
Monty, when people characterize China's problems at Worlds, and then obviously you can also, in theory, include in IEM San Jose, because they were expected to potentially win that tournament, they went out in the first round. When people characterize this area now, they use like perfect hindsight, and they go, right, well, it's obvious that any problems I could see earlier in the year meant they were always destined to fail, and these teams didn't have the right practice structure, and they didn't understand how to play in this world. Let me postulate a theory to you, okay? Is it possible that something about how the game itself was changed, like how a team has to operate or particular interactions between positions changed over the year, and that China somehow hasn't been able to figure that out, hasn't been able to embrace that, because all these other reasons don't seem to work for the earlier part of the year where they were very good. Like the same logic that made them fall down should have made them bad then, surely.
I think there are a couple reasons why first off, I think the Korean exodus to China actually really helped out the Chinese teams, because they took a lot of the raw talent and it took time for the Korean players to develop once again, and for them to take kind of rising stars or rising players that had looked pretty good maybe the previous year but weren't entirely there yet. People like perhaps Chaser or who did look good at the end of 2014, but still was a bit underwhelming overall. I think that's a factor to consider here. I think that, and then so you also had a bunch of players leaving and having to develop more teamwork. So I think the individual talent in China was high enough. I don't really think that there were that many meta shifts. I mean, of course, we can talk about the juggernaut issue at the World Championships and whether or not the top laners that were there were truly proficient in that style of metagame. It's probably valid too.
I personally think that Edward Gaming had far and away the best infrastructure, and the best support and the best
but they didn't
regiment. But the thing is
the best top laner for that tournament though.
But the thing is that going from spring to the end of spring to summer is that when their players did start having a lot of health issues. So they did a lot of rotating out that I think really hurt their synergy. And overall, I just like the abrupt change. They did not adapt well to it. And I know that, like, for one thing, Corwin wasn't in as good of a shape in the quarterfinals as he could have been. He wasn't there were some background issues in EDG, but I think just in general, the team dynamic to EDG initially wasn't suited, and they also tried to change. So I think Origin or whatever did a really good job of playing towards the bot lane still, even though it was a top lane meta, and EDG tried to play to top, but if you watch Clearlove's jungle pathing, it was just so messed up. Like, he would try to gank before Koro was 6 and could do well on Fiora or things like this, and just their dynamic just seemed really off. And actually, even when I interviewed Reckless afterwards, he said, I think they just tried to play our game when they should have played their own game, which made sense to me also in terms of that best of 5. Of course, this isn't everything that went wrong with Edward Gaming, but for me, it was like, if you track their performance in the summer, and it seemed like for a while that a lot of other teams were catching up, but I really think Edward Gaming just hurt themselves a lot, because in spring they were so much further ahead than everyone.
Okay.
And they probably would have still been competitive at Worlds if they were so much further ahead than everyone. But
I noticed you called him Reckles there. Now listen, as all Western
Reckless.
fans of Uzi I know, it's incredibly offensive to call someone by the name that Westerners would choose and not his name, his original language. Only an ignoramus would do that. They can all agree with that. So
I do know that he prefers Reckless as far as I've been informed. So
prefers a lot of things, mate.
There you go.
You don't always get what you prefer in life, as we've all found out on this show. So, okay, so here's the question then, is what really happened with Koro 1? Because as far as I can remember, first of all, there was the whole issue where, okay, so at MSI, he was fantastic. Then he came home from MSI, and wasn't it something like initially he wasn't in the lineup because of a contract dispute, but then eventually when they fixed the team, then he was sick at some point in time. What's the timeline of what happened there?
So I know that going into the split, there was a contract dispute with Koro 1 where he wasn't necessarily happy with his pay. And so they signed Amazing J kind of as a failsafe. And then he started to have back issues. I'm not sure if it's related directly to playing a lot, because Koro is one of those players who just plays a lot. But that cut down on his ability to practice. But he did come back mid-split, and they went on a 21-game winning streak, which to people who watch Fnatic, obviously, that will ring out. But after that, when they went to playoffs, the team kind of fell apart again, and they tried to do some strange things in playoffs. Again, it was just, I felt like Edward Gaming had this feeling that their meta was out of date, and so they kept trying to change that and fix that and do that better, and they just did things that didn't make sense. I don't know. It was like their playoffs compositions and draftings were not good. Then
That's definitely true.
Yeah, regionals they played Amazing J. I do think there is some evidence to suggest that they were hiding Coro 1, right? But I don't think that worked out for them for various internal reasons.
You mean in Worlds they were hiding Coro 1?
Yeah, allegedly.
So it wasn't just that they did the OMG where they were just in trouble and they thought we have to bring the scout for the quarterfinals?
Yeah, I think that they were actually intending to keep Coro 1 hidden for the quarterfinals, but then for various reasons, Coro 1 wasn't in good shape. I'm not really clear on what these are, everything else. So, like, obviously he played terribly, and there's no excuse for that. So, and then Edward Gaming played as a unit terribly. Like, they played like they didn't understand what they were doing. Def's teleport Jace when he should, and when he obviously didn't really understand when to use teleport, or their shot calling didn't really understand when to use teleport on their AD carry. So,
well, the problem with that was, I mean, the biggest problem was, that was the game that they should have won.
Yes,
they should have won that game 100%, and then they didn't use teleport properly, and they screwed it up. Oh, right. So yeah, they had that game 100% won. It was a game 1 of that series that they used the teleport Jace. Yeah, they had 100% victory there because they could have just stopped the backs and then teleported into the enemy base and won the game. That was I remember talking about that one now. So yeah, that's a big problem. If you can't use teleport properly, you have no business running that composition, which is what I said at the time. That's the entire point. So if you can't do that, there is no point anymore.
So I think Edward Gaming have a good infrastructure, a good coaching staff in place, a good focus on practice, these sorts of things, but they need to, one, find a way to keep their players healthy, and two, actually like pay more attention to understanding the meta ahead of time. And maybe there is something to be said for teams with communication issues have trouble discussing how to adapt. I don't know if that's true or not, but just they need to focus more on what's good and what's good for them, and understanding that aspect.
So you've met Aaron a bunch of times, okay? And presumably you have a translator with you when you meet him. Surely off camera you ask some of these things. No?
I asked him in an interview why he played certain picks in the playoffs, because I interviewed him actually at Worlds early on in the group stage.
Yep.
So I did ask him about the playoffs drafts. He did say that they were trying to do something more early game focused, that those games, and he said sometimes you try things and they don't work out, but you at least try them. And he also said that having coached for a long time, I had a feeling that having won so much, we were going to hit a rut like pretty soon. Okay. So he says that happens if your team is just like wins a lot for a while. This is something that he said, so I don't know if I necessarily agree with that or not, but
that is strange when you consider how many games they won.
It is, because I do think that's a valid statement, because at a certain point the rut happens, because if you keep on winning 20 games in a row, there's not really a challenge to continue to drive you forward or to increase your knowledge over the game, right? Basically everybody else just has an opportunity to catch up with you, and it's very hard to get better at that stage.
The thing is, I actually think the reason why that happens, the other dynamic, is by winning with one style that's super effective over and over, you actually force people to learn how to play against that style, and they will eventually figure out counters to it. So a good example of this is obviously the Blaze teams of 2013, where they kept the style forever, and by the way, it never became a bad style. They were never the worst team. They were always a good team, but once it was figured out and they kept doing that style, you saw they never returned to glory again. They kept trying to do the old late game style. So the problem with that is, it's not one or the other. Like, you have to do both. Like, you have to stick with what works, the formula, but then start to notice when it isn't working, and then be thinking of what you can transition to after that point. And it's worth pointing out, by the way, the majority of teams in history can't do that. Like, actually, that's part of why, if you ever look, these empires of teams rise and fall. Nearly always in the dynamic of the metagame, the team that replaces the old great team is almost a direct counter to that style of play. So that's why when occasionally you do get a team that returns to the top again, we actually had this happen in Counter-Strike last year, where the team that won the most tournaments, Fnatic, it would look like if you just saw how many tournaments they won, oh, they were just the best all year. But actually they had dips in form. They had times where people beat them and times where they had problems with certain players, and they had to like reinvent themselves 3 or 4 times to stay on top. It's not that they were just on top and they never could be beaten and they just kept going, doing the same thing, you know. So unfortunately in League of Legends, it's a bit more black and white because obviously the game changes. So it's not like you can just figure things out as your own team. Like, for example, I've always said this, Monty, the biggest problem in League of Legends is that just because of the way humans model things, we model them by making them as simple as possible. So we look at a player and we see how he did in the game and we say, right, oh, his form must be good now. And what we ignore is if the meta changes so that his role isn't as impactful, it's almost impossible to be as good as he was in the previous meta. Yet we will often judge that as though he fell off individually on some skill level, you know. So unfortunately in League of Legends, there's so much more nuance to it. It's hard to keep all that in mind. But in this sort of sense, though, Kelsey, when you see all those photos of EDG's like headquarters, it looks amazing. That looks better than some of the Korean headquarters I've been to.
Definitely.
If they have these amazing setups like that and they have coaches and all the rest of it, is there something in place that will fix all this next year? Like, will they be more regimented, or will they find their own way to make it without having to go the Korean way or whatever?
So I think that they can, because they do have the resources at hand to be able to make these adaptations. I think based on Aaron's answer when I did interview him, it's almost like they tried to do stuff that they weren't suited to and sort of psych themselves out in this way because they felt like people would be able to beat them with their own style, so they went to things that they didn't understand or that didn't make sense. I think that they did withdraw from all of the off-season tournaments.
By the way, that's called the Imp Cogmore Trinity Force fallacy. But okay, continue.
Yeah, this is just a theory based on the answers he gave. Not necessarily true. They did withdraw from all 2015 off-season tournaments. They said it was due to Pawn's injury being still a problem. But, I mean, I also think that they were realizing this was a problem in the first off-season tournament when they lost to Energy Pacemaker All in the quarterfinals. I mean, you could make all sorts of jokes about how LGD Gaming and Invictus Gaming have fallen out in the same round every off-season tournament since Worlds. But they lost in the quarterfinals in the first tournament to Energy Pacemaker All, which is an LPL team. They did qualify, but it's still Energy Pacemaker All. So I think that was kind of a wake-up call to them, and they weren't running their main roster again. That they needed to really refocus and figure out what they were doing. So I do expect next year to just be more of EDG winning, at least for a while. I could be wrong, but for now, that's my expectation.
So what's confusing me about Pawn, okay, is exactly what his medical status is. I've said this on the show before, okay. So one of the problems with Koreans, it's not really a problem, it's just a tendency they have. I've said this before. As a people, they're kind of like hypochondriacs if you were a Westerner. You'll be like, what's going on here? Like someone having a normal cold, they will go to the doctor, they'll have... I've actually done this myself. I went to the pharmacist and I've said to my friend in Korea, like, can you ask for some cough medicine? They come out with like 4 different packs. Like, take this one in the morning, then take this one. I go, no, you just take one pill. No, and then you need this one, and then drink this, but only later on. Like, hey, there better be some magic in this, like some root or something that's going to heal me. Like, can I just have the one Lemsip pill or whatever that makes my throat taste like lemons? That's all I need. Great, no context quote there. So anyway, here's the issue I have with this, Kelsey, is unfortunately knowing that background, when I hear all this stuff like, oh God, Pawn in hospital, possibly, will he make it, touch and go, and then all of a sudden he's in his chair playing the fucking 5th game and winning it like, I'm wrecking him. Then, magically when the team's doing awesome at MSI, he's got no problem, he's busy luring Faker into these next level, 17 level fucking trap card, Yu-Gi-Oh traps, but then apparently, as soon as they start losing again, oh, my back, like what is going on? As far as I can tell, I think Pawn has that same problem that Robert Carlyle's villain character had in that bad Bond movie. Was it Was it The World Is Not Enough? Where he had a bullet that was lodged in him that was sort of gradually moving towards his bloodstream to kill him.
Terrible.
But it wouldn't kill him immediately, but it would gradually kill him eventually. And so that's what drove him maniacally to try and conquer the world, I feel like there must be something along that level, because how can porn be like crippled one day, like can't move, and then the next day he's back in his chair? Do you have any sense for what goes on there?
So everyone I've asked, people affiliated with the team and not, do say that Pawn is actually sick and injured. That there is actually something going on
Fair
there.
enough.
I can't necessarily completely verify anything except that there is a problem with his lower back. That makes it difficult for him to sit in the chair a lot. Of course, sometimes he'll just do it anyway, and so that's part of why EDG withdrew from all these tournaments, is just so that he would have to focus on recovering.
So you know how in the fictional story of the Bible, when the woman was created out of the rib of Adam, the first man. Not a metaphor, obviously a literal historical account. So when that happened, maybe that's what Porn's done. He has to sacrifice one of his vertebrae every time he wants to defeat Faker in a 1v1. Now listen, if you want to defeat a god, you better use powerful magics, So he's done it like 4 or 5 times, so he's in trouble right now. His back is like a xylophone with half the keys missing. So... And he's trying to do that little...
And
keep going.
They don't just send him to the hospital, like they ship him to Korea to seek medical attention in Korea. So
I assume the second his back hurts, they airlift him out of there in a fucking helicopter to the EDG headquarters in Korea, where he has a specialist. Michael Jackson's doctor actually comes in. He's like, "Is Porn here? Oh my god, Porn!" And then they put him under, even though all they're going to do is check his back and give him a massage. They put him fully under. He's in sort of like a tent, like in E.T. when they came, all those guys from the government, the CIA or whatever, Monty, and they just locked him away, and they all had hazmat suits on, and they're all like, life support, life status. Anyway, you see where I'm going with that one.
Well,
so is that ever going to be resolved, though? Is it like a permanent problem going forwards?
So they've been optimistic about it lately, and they did move all their top lane subs to EDE, which is their LSPL team. So Koro will be the only top laner that they have for spring, unless they sign someone from solo queue or a free agent of some kind. They did sign Athena to Edward Gaming as a sub.
Why do they have Athena?
It's my understanding that Bamey wasn't really working out for them. Weren't really.
He wasn't working out for anyone.
Yeah, so. Not really happy with Bamey. And according to a recent interview with Aaron by Dolan, they were actually looking at Athena as much as a half of a year ago. But at that time, he didn't want to leave ever.
So basically, EDG are like all these liar Twitter analysts I see. Like, I always knew these players were really good 7 months ago, like they always do. Okay, yeah, keep going.
And it just now worked out.
Is Kefka lol in EDG? That's what I'm asking. Okay, keep going. Shout out to my boy there. Keep going.
So they finally were able to get Athena on the team, and I think Athena is going to be in the same kind of like a backup, just in case something happens with Pawn's back again. In answer to the question, will Athena rotate in as much as Bamey, they pretty much just said, well, we haven't really scrimmed with him at all yet, so we don't know how he'll be. And it depends on that. So
they just took this random player without scrimming with him, even though, for example, I think Athena's okay. I think he's a decent mid laner. He's a nice rookie talent, I think, to pick up, but he's not the most impressive thing about ever, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that Athena is probably, there are probably at least 3 players better than Athena on ever.
Here's a crazy concept for you, Monty and Kelsey, okay? So if we know Porn is having back problems and might not be able to play all the time, and we can get another Korean player, and our star Korean player is deft, crazy thought, maybe get that key guy and put him in the bot lane with the deaf fellow. That might help.
But people have a hard-on for Mako. We can talk about Mako.
He looks like a young Dade. That's all I know about him. He looks like a young Dade.
A jungler in a sport that speak the same language. I think that works. And I think Mako, I know you guys don't think too highly of Mako, but I do think he is.
I actually think Mako is one of the best rookies this year. I think he's a legitimate candidate for Rookie of the Year, in fact. So don't tell me what I do and don't like.
Okay. All of those episodes of Summoning Insight were lies.
No,
The problem is, Kelsey, earlier in the year, people were trying to tell me every single member of EDG is like top 3 in the world at their position. That can't be the case. Come on.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think so talking about supports, I think Mako is a pretty good laning support, but he does tend to be like sometimes super engage happy. So I think
he's a great engage support.
Yeah,
what I always said about him was he's great on engaged champions. He's not great on disengaged champions. That was the thing I said about Mako. I think
Janna is like one of his better champions, but I think that it's more he's good at finding an opening in a team fight, but not necessarily playing all dimensions of the team fight, if that makes sense. And
isn't that troublesome when you play with Deft?
Huh?
Isn't that troublesome when you play with Deft, who lives in team fights and needs to stay alive?
I don't think that... I'm not saying that he's bad at all dimensions of the team fight, but I'm saying that like those are where some of his weaknesses might come through. And I think that sometimes like if he... This is something he's gotten better at, but initially it was like if he had his hookup on Thresh, he would just always go for it, right? And this, I think, also initially helped Deft become more aggressive in lane, is just because, I better follow that guy up because he's doing this thing. Okay. But I think that,
I know how to fix the bot lane.
Just
so I'm going to get them
and I'm exaggerating like these aspects of his weaknesses because you're asking me like where are Mako's weaknesses, but I'm not going to go all the way and say like he's trash.
Believe it or not, people don't have to be trash to have weaknesses, as anyone who's a Reckless fan doesn't understand still. So, continue.
Whereas I would say that, if you want a good roam support or something, who's Chinese, you would go for PYL. If you want someone who's going to help you more in lane and help you start team fights, I would pick Mako. So, and Mako is actually also really good at warding in mid game. So,
see, I think I know how we can fix that bot lane. What I'm going to do is I'll go to China and I'll show Deft videos of Gambit Gaming circa early 2013. And then I'll be like, look, see the way the support makes a really good play, he lands this hook? It's like, yeah, what happens next? The AD carry just stays back and keeps farming. Wait a minute, but the support went in, though. He's going to die. Yeah, he will learn not to do that, though. So, and now you build a Zephyr. So anyway, you use that gold to build a Zephyr. So, yeah, that's how I'd fix that team.
I think
what about... Okay, yeah?
Another thing is that I think Deft is a little bit better at like cooldown-based AD carries. So with the introduction of Essence Reaver and stuff, I think he'll be happier than he was at the end of last split.
So he can spam his Corki, his Ezreal.
Yeah, some like Corki, maybe Ezreal. We'll see.
Okay. Do you with the roster moves made now? In theory, there's not going to be any more made. So if this lineup is what EDG has going forwards to next year, can this be salvaged and can they be like the world's best team? Is this a possibility?
I mean, I think they can be very competitive. Like I said, I think right now if there is going to be a Chinese team that's going to be competitive, come MSI or come Worlds, it will be EDG probably.
You don't like new look LGD with Marin?
I don't. I mean, I think that LGD might be good initially, but then they'll slowly sort of start to lose some steam. It's kind of my prediction with LGD. From what I understand, their new jungler is working out pretty well in scrims for them, so they're happy with that.
Remind me of his name.
Amy.
Oh, right.
One who was on Heart's team.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, Amy is Judgment.
Everyone had a giant hype boner over.
Amy has really weird judgment errors, but he has a lot of people on LGD who can kind of tell him, no, that's dumb. So that's probably good for him.
So why won't this fix the team then? Because one of the problems they obviously had was they didn't want to use Flame all the time. Flame's gone now anyway. And Acorn clearly had something wrong with him the last 2 tournaments. So is it Marin a fantastic top player? And isn't this a way to make them back like the old LGD that was very good? I
think if you look at Marin and how he plays, like if you guys haven't seen Loyal to the Dragon, Brendan Schilling, he's now the analyst for Immortals.
Thank God, I thought you were talking about a fucking anime there. I was like, no, I haven't seen Loyal to the Dragon, whatever that is. Okay,
what did you just say? Loyal to the Dragon?
Loyota the Dragon.
Loyota the Dragon. He does these really interesting...
That is somebody's ID?
Yep.
Yeah.
Writes articles from Gold.
You can also just call him Brendan Schilling. But he does these really in-depth jungle gank priority articles where he looks at a split's worth of play for junglers and says, oh, he goes for his first gank, he'll go top this percentage of time, mid this percentage of time, and all this stuff. He did one on Bengi, which said that 50% of his first ganks are top lane. And then I think it was like it was fairly even in terms of Faker and Martin after this. And this was done before Worlds, so I think actually his tendency to go top increased as the meta shifted more towards Juggernauts. He did a similar analysis with LGD and TBQ.
I think he did the Bengi piece while they were still on that undefeated best of 3 run. I think it was at that point where they were
I remember that one.
Yeah. I think that was when it was, yeah.
But then he did a similar one to LGD, and 5% of all ganks were top lane ganks for the playoffs. So that, to me, is an interesting question for Marin. Is he jungle dependent? Is he jungle pressure dependent or not? Will he do super well adapting? Like, will LGD then change the way they play? Because the way I thought that LGD did well is they would have PYL and TBQ dual roam mid and gank mid, and then this would get Gawai ahead, and that would open up the map for them because then he would do all sorts of roaming with his advantage. And the team became slightly more bot focused, so they ganked bottom more, and then Godway fell behind a lot. So I think the question, like something that I would approach if I were LGD is Are you
calling him Godway?
Godway, whatever. Okay. It's just like the V thing is very odd word.
Just asking. Okay.
Yeah, you can say whatever. Pain Evil, Wayless. According to a recent roster list that they released, he's going back to Wayless. Okay.
I mean, I feel like it's like a rock scenario. Like, it actually doesn't matter what his name is. Like, he's not irrelevant right now. So
at this point, I think he's going back to Wayless, so we'll just call him Wayless.
I mean, he's literally trying to make a name for himself. keep going, because he's shit. But
only on the international scene, right?
So something I would do is that I would, maybe have Amy gank mid first, and then have him roam top or something like that. That would be like a starting point to build from with the team dynamic, because I think Imp, you can just leave him in a lane and have him farm. That's usually what they do with him anyway, so yeah.
Well, Imp famously even likes to play bad. He actually is what Xiaogu wish they had. He actually famously likes to play bad matchups just to egotistically prove he's better than the other AD carry, which is like some Forgiven level shit where it's like, if you're the best, why not play a winning matchup and win the game? And they're like, no, life must be harder. I can't enjoy things and win all the time. Some people are like that. Some people are actually anime characters, but the problem is life isn't anime. Sorry to break that to most of our fans for this show. So, Monty, what did you actually think of God v Pain Evil's performance at Worlds and the IEM?
I thought at Worlds, he was at least like getting it together by the end of the group stage a little bit and trying to play with more confidence and more of an ability to really go in and get to the back line, which really has been one of his signature styles. We see him all the time as a player who is very aggressive, who likes to play champions like Diana and disrupt the back line. And I think we didn't see that for a lot of Worlds, which was weird. And I don't know. I thought IEM was just a train wreck all around for LGD. I have no idea what was wrong with them in that situation. Everything was wrong, apparently. But it was disappointing because at least by the end of Worlds, we started to see at least what we know about God V or Wayless or whatever you want to call him, his play style, which is sad because he actually set up a lot of the double teleport meta coming into the World Championship, and it was really LGD that was pioneering that in the LPL playoffs, and it would have been nice for them to do what we know they can do.
Kelsey, here's the thing. Normally, when someone is like a choker or whatever, it normally manifests on the domestic level. That alone will be enough to trigger the person, and the nerves will get the better of them. How could someone be so good all year long and so bad at times internationally? Like is there something broken in God V, do you think?
I don't know. I think he has some problems with tilt, for sure. I've heard this from Vici Gaming initially. He used to play on Vici Gaming, and so he transferred to LGD, and they kind of said that he was difficult to work with in some regards because of tilt issues or just his general playstyle. So I think that's a problem that he has. I'm not really sure what was going on with LGD. It just felt like they lost all will to live. I guess in the pre-IEM interview, Imp was just saying, yeah, we'll probably lose.
I mean, that was, he said that there, but it was also LGD. When I was at IEM, they really did not seem very confident at all and ready, just from what the players were saying. They didn't come into IEM thinking, and which is extra disappointing because they talked a really fucking big game after Worlds saying that we're going to redeem ourselves and but then they show up and just have the most defeatist attitude I've ever seen.
Yeah, so I don't really know what was going on with that at all.
They didn't have a coach because they got rid of that Firefox guy that I said did nothing, and everybody was like, no, he does stuff. He was there the whole time. He was there. I was like, well, it doesn't look like it.
In general, I think LGD just had problems with organizing and their ethic and everything. It's just like their organization has a lot of messy parts to it in terms of management. I think that if they do well, it says a lot. This year, it says a lot about heart. I will say that.
You mean the actual player, just to clarify that?
Yeah, Hart, the player who is now their head coach.
It needs to be said, Monty. It's pretty bold, right?
Concept or the Captain
It's
Power
all about
planet.
the heart. It's all about their hearts and souls, yeah. So I think that's what I'll say about that.
I mean, it's true. By the end of Worlds, they did look like going into that second week, they were just a broken gang of people. Like, God V didn't know what he could do. So then what happened was, in came Flame, and like a leader of men, like Maximus in the movie Gladiator. You know the scene where he gets all the slaves, and they're pitted in a battle where they're going to play the Carthaginians, who are supposed to lose to the Romans in this key fight, okay? Because Maximus, like a true man, is just like, follow me, do what I say, stick together. He leads the way. They defeat the horde Romans, so obviously all the fans are behind TSM in this case. All the little plebs love him. Yeah, daddy, the Romans, yeah, it's TSM. And they obviously wreck them like legendary style with the hero leading them forwards. At which point, obviously, the Emperor just wants him to be killed because that's what people try to do to legends. So anyway, here's my question for you as well. Another thing that I found a worrying trend. See, I analyse the game differently, Kelsey. Mainly because I don't analyse the game. I analyse things that aren't in the game. So one of the key analysis, like the amount of time I spend poring over interviews, what I analysed in this interview that I didn't like, Kelsey, going forwards, is, as you might have noticed on this show before, I don't like League of Legends players who start crying. Like, it's not your 12th birthday. You didn't get the wrong fucking Barbie dream house. You are a professional player and a man. Like, do you understand what stoicism is? So my question is,
they don't.
I know they don't.
Do you
mate.
think Eddie?
They don't.
I would be impressed if you were a pro gamer and you were watching this right now and you understand or can even describe the Greek philosophy of stoicism. Please come on the show and do it because I would love to see that. I'm pretty sure that no one can.
You have to realize, Monty, if I was actually the coach of LGD, I wouldn't be giving them the art of war, mate. I'd be handing out like Epicurus. I'd be like, listen, this is where we need to start. What does this got to do with League of Legends, though, coach? This is about being a man, motherfucker. Now let's go. I need men to win on this game. By the way, every social justice warrior is triggered as fuck out there. Get at me. Anyway, so
the old meditations. Give the Marcus Aurelius.
So here's the thing, okay?
I will say, okay.
So PYL started just mad crying, joining my list of my Hall of Shame with Reckless and Deft. He's in there as well. First ballot Hall of Shame for crying after a fucking League of Legends game. Is there something with PYL as well? Because it seems like, again, listen, you want to talk about Mako. You guys went... Kelsey, you got to be straight on this one. You guys went fucking ham on PYL. You thought he was like the matter of China, right?
PYL is still good, okay?
Where's Homie at? Where Homie at? What you done for me lately, as Janet Jackson said in the 80s?
Yeah, we'll see. Definitely was not good for PYL at Worlds or IAM. It's just really interesting to me because if you look at it statistically, like LGD had one of the shortest average game times. They had the highest lane swap rate in the LPL. They had all that. So like they had this idea of where they were going and what they were doing, because if they're able to close games that quickly, or if they do lane swap quite frequently, or they have this high level of roaming where PYL is constantly like with the jungler, all this. We didn't see any of that at Worlds. I don't know. Was it a massive, like, this is one of those things where I literally can't explain it. People will say that I sound like a giant China apologist, but it's just like something they literally played completely They played like they had no direction.
One of the factors at Worlds, at the very least, was one thing that I noticed was that after the Korean boot camp for the Western teams, pretty much all the Korean teams had switched over to the EU style of lane swapping, where they would put 3 men on the push and then keep the jungling on the strong side, right? And so, but the Chinese teams actually didn't make that switch for the group stage, which makes me wonder what their preparation for Worlds was, because the Korean teams were scrimming very actively with the Western teams and had picked up on this as a preferable way to do the lane swaps, which they hadn't really done before, and I hadn't seen in Korea in champions in that scenario. But the LPL teams just said, we're not going to do that. I don't know if they didn't practice against that style of lane swapping. I have no idea what their prep for World was, but it was a really noticeable difference in 2 regions that weren't doing that lane swap. Korea just completely went over to it, and China stuck with their guns. And I think that probably really affected a team like LGD's ability to play with the lane swap.
And I agree with that also. Like, that's a good way to condense sort of what I'm saying. But I think that I know they did scrim Western teams, for sure. Maybe they just didn't have the capability or the ability to come together and react as well as the Korean teams and change the way they were playing. Maybe they kind of froze up and freaked out. I know when I interviewed Kakao after their last game against Cloud9 where they won, I asked him, okay, so you and LGD, you both didn't really have a very proactive style or look at the game, and then when you were eliminated or when you had lost and you knew you were out of the group, you suddenly like came in and were very much more aggressive and had better games and won your last games. And he said, well, I think there's a difference between how Korean teams play and how Chinese teams play. Korean teams are much more methodical. They try to base their strategy much more on communication and moving around the map. And this is like obviously paraphrasing, but the Chinese teams, they're much more ham or aggressive, or they just try to go all in and sometimes style. So initially we were trying to play like a Korean team, and when we lost, we decided to just play like a Chinese team. And I said, okay. I mean, that's interesting enough. So I don't know if that's he said that he thought that maybe that was also true of LGD.
By the way, just to clarify something, saying that you don't know something or don't have a conclusion does not actually mean that you are bad at analysis. In fact, it actually is a suggestion you are good at analysis, because you understand that when you model things, you cannot always get a black and white firm answer. I realise to fans, at all points in time, they have to know some sort of universal truth that is unalterable. But actually, when you are analysing something, you create a model, which is an abstraction of the thing, because you can't know anything on a pure level, and you have to change the model as time goes. So there will always be a period of time between 2 distinct models when you're figuring out how to design the new model, when actually you have to break down the old one and you won't really know what's going on. That's why in hindsight you do get more perspective on things when you have the future as a data point to feed into that, and that's where you get to a new model. So I wouldn't worry that people think you're a Chinese apologist if you say I don't know the reason why. I think that's quite a reasonable thing to say, actually.
Well, nobody knows the reason why, right? I don't know the reason why either. Obviously these teams looked significantly
apparently everyone
better.
Does, mate. Remember, they didn't have a coach and they didn't practice.
I mean, well, I mean, we're hearing about these kind of issues now, but these aren't things that...
I was being sarcastic, by the way. That's obviously not the only reason why, is it?
No, but even without those conditions, a lot of these teams were playing well in the LPL playoffs. Sure. So their weird collapse before Worlds. Okay, so fine. Maybe they don't win the World Championship, but LGD going out in groups, like, that's what's weird.
Yeah, that was strange. I don't know. I mean, I will say that I think that they at least identified their biggest roster weakness and replaced him going forward. So that it means that at least shows that they have some like pulse on what's wrong with their team. They did bring in a coach. They were initially going to keep Firefox on as an analyst, but he left because he said he wanted to prove himself after the terrible problems. So
he's got some spirit. I'll give him that. He's got some spunk. He wants to prove himself, Monty.
And I think like he definitely deserves some blame, but going all in and saying that he should have all of the blame when if you have a team that's not necessarily scrimming very seriously and in management that isn't backing you up, and you're winning and they haven't necessarily been punished for it yet, which they weren't necessarily winning scrims, but apparently LGD, if you talk to the other teams, are one of the bigger perpetrators of not using scrims well. So, I mean, how do you gauge whether or not you're progressing well in that case? It's complicated, is all I'm gonna say. Like, I don't think Firefox is terrible, but he definitely deserves some blame there. So, because allegedly he was doing all of their drafts for playoffs as well. So we don't know.
So one of the biggest roster moves was Uzi transferred over to Xiaogu, and as a result, as far as we know, he's replaced TNT, who obviously was one of the better players on that team. What is your thoughts on that move initially, Uzi to Xiaogu?
So, I did recently do an article on some of kind of the conclusion I come to is if you have a player like Swift and like UZI on the same team, it can become a little difficult. Swift is, I think they're similar players in different roles, if I put it concisely. They both like to go into situations and kind of style and own the team fight, and they expect a certain amount of backup from their teammates. I think that there was a situation in Starhorn Royal Club with Insect that was similar, but in QG you have to factor in V, the top laner, who I think is also a very engaged, happy player who likes to go in this situation. So you have a situation where maybe not so much the gold resources, but the peel resources are going to be a little bit more chaotic in team fights. I do think UCI has a much stronger laning phase than TNT, quite considerably. I think that they're almost opposite players, because TNT is like the kind of player who you can just let him go and he'll still get a lot of kills, he'll still position self-sufficiently and do pretty well with very little peel, whereas UZI, I think, and this isn't necessarily a criticism against UZI, just like a different play style where he does best when he has teammates backing him up, and he can become like this crazy wrecking ball with like a bunch of shields on him and just do extremely well from that regard. So I think that will be a challenge for them to overcome. UZI, like I said, will improve their laning phase, but he will still be paired with TCT. So if you watch TCT, his laning phase is kind of, he'll just sometimes overextend in the lane and expose himself to getting junked out, and so they'll have to play much more conservatively after that.
Is that possible? Isn't the whole thing about Uzi is he doesn't have like anything except fifth gear, right? In laning phase.
So I think it's a good question about how much can the support control. Like if you have a crazy monster laning phase AD carry like UZI, like how much power does the support have to kind of ruin that, or can I don't know, the AD carry just say let's go, you're going to 1v2 or something like that. The other thing that's interesting is that QG's Newbie's CEO, CUZN, did an interview recently where he says that they want to sign an additional 1 to 2 players in each role. So they're looking to build like the same sort of 10-man roster setup that Royal Never Give Up have. And they're hoping that they can do this sort of rotation. Linko also, their manager, did an interview where he said that UZI actually probably won't start on the main lineup right away. They're going to continue to play TNT and see how UZI works on the team in scrims first before they debut him.
Okay.
Because he said we aren't sure yet whether or not he can adapt to the team or the team will have to adapt to them, so that's something we have to figure out, is what he said in the interview. So they're at least thinking about that. I don't really know if I like the move, just from the perspective of having heard people talk about how large his buyout number supposedly was. Like, if you're spending that much money on an AD carry when you already have TNT, I don't really know how sound that move is from an economic standpoint, but if Newbie can stand, or the streaming platform can stand to take that hit, then I guess it can be a good move or a bad move. It just really, really depends on how they play it out.
So Monty, obviously the thing about Xiaogu is they had a very defined game and the points of the game where they were strong and how they would win all their games, basically. What do you actually think of adding in Uzi to the mix? Like, could this be a better team?
I think that Xiaogu already had a tendency to play around the AD carry anyway, with the fact that Doinby likes to play champions like Morgana and Lulu, and we've seen them do a lot of that style of play in the past. So if that's the case, then upgrading your AD carry may be a good answer for them, right? They did do that less, I would say, as the year went on. They started out really hard that way.
I think those resources were for Swift, usually. He likes to follow in Swift. Most of the Lulus go in when he used to play Sejuani, he would just go ham into a fight regardless, and then he would ult the Sejuani with the Lulu. Or
that's fine, but the Whimsy is still incredibly useful for an AD carry player, and actually does provide. Yeah,
and I agree with that. My question is just Swift and UZI on the same roster, who both kind of like that sort of support from the mid laner. Which one? How does that work out? That's my main question.
Sure. Yeah. So
I mean, isn't there only one answer to that based on history, which is that Swift has to yield, basically? I mean, first of all, the person we've spent all the money on is UZI. Secondly, UZI in general, aside from the period when he started playing Sivir in OMG, it seems like he has kept his old style where he's the selfish carry, but he's really good. And even when he played Sivir, he was one of those people that broke the myth that Sivir's a supportive champion, because he was still just dominating on it and doing mad damage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you can say UCI got better at being more self-sufficient and less. I still think it's very much his nature to go in and require those resources. My only question is Swift. It's always been I don't think Swift has changed as a player since he was on Xenix, right? So you have these two players who haven't really changed their fundamental style for their entire careers, and it's all about juggling that and whether or not they will do that successfully.
Okay. So is Xiaogu a contender for LPL?
I think that they, in terms of their management being somewhat intelligent and their own, they are getting a new coach. Hero said that he felt like he wasn't really doing anything for the team. So
imagine saying that. Asians are so naive, aren't they?
How do you feel about Kelsey? Because I know you don't have a soft spot in your heart for Hero.
I mean, I don't really. I mean, for me, I'll always hold Wei Xiao retiring against him, which might be unfair, but he said that he felt like he wasn't really meeting the expectations, and it came off as very, very humble, right, where he felt like he wasn't doing anything, and he was excited about not really knowing where he was going next, these sorts of things in his departure statement. And they say that they're going to funnel some of their funds from Newbie, because Newbie just has a lot of money. They're really rich. So they're going to funnel some of these funds into support staff.
Okay. Let me put it this way.
Because that was always the problem with QG before, is that they didn't really have any sponsors or anything. Okay. So
let me put
they have a lot of money.
Test. At the end of 2016, which team will have done better out of Xiaogu and LGD?
Oh gosh, this is such a hard question.
Who would you put your money on?
Because they're in the same group, so it's really hard to. Oh my gosh, this is such a hard question. I think just looking at the raw talent on the LGD lineup and seeing a better way for them to work together on paper, and knowing that there will be problems in the short run, you have to go with LGD, but I wouldn't put QG out of the running, because I think that QG will probably do better than LGD in the regular season.
Is Doinby a bad player?
I don't think he's a bad player, but I think he's a very specific player. I think that having players like UZI and Swift on his team are kind of necessary for him to be successful, because I think he sort of thrives on that setting where he can play a bunch of different weird things that are just played solely because they're good at backing up this player that likes to go ham. So that's what I think about Doinby, and I think he's very good at that specific style, but I'm not sure if he'd adapt well or do well in a different environment. Okay. I think he's also a really good Kassadin player, but even when you watch him play Kassadin, it's like Swift is going in on Lee Sin, so Doinby follows up, he immediately hits his Zonias, and he waits for the rest of the team to collapse and join with him, right? So even then, it's a very much a distracting, supportive kind of Kassadin. Really strange.
So to me, the most exciting roster move of the whole off season and potentially the whole year, depending on what happens with a certain incredible miracle, was Name has gone to Royal Never Give Up, and in theory, as long as they don't fuck around with the lineup will be Name Mata bot lane. So in theory, one of the best Chinese AD carries of all time with one of the best support players from Korea of all time, and this might be a real bot lane that we get to see game in, game out.
It's very exciting, right?
Sure. What do you think of it, Monty, that prospect?
Well, I mean, I don't think Name played very well last year, nor do I think Mata played very well or even tried very hard. So I'm a bit reluctant to get super excited about this because I don't know what the motivation or skill level of these players exactly is at the moment. But on paper, if we ignore last year, it would have been very exciting. I really hope we can get back to where they were at one point in time.
But that's why I think it is exciting, because when you look at the people they were playing with, there were issues with some of the teams they were playing with and with some of the people they had as lane partners at times. So the idea to me is, by putting the two of them together, who are only a year removed from being the best, it's more like there's no excuse left now. Now we're going to see if you're actually good. If you're not at this point in time, when you both get to play now, it's probably the end. So this is either the sick comeback to glory, or it's probably just the fizzle out at the end of your careers. That's my take on it.
I think it has to be that, really. I am a bit surprised that Mata didn't end up coming back to Korea. That's a little interesting to me, that he went back to China after all, because he was one of the people saying in interviews that he wanted to go back to Korea this time, and especially with teams stepping up and paying more, like Incredible Miracle, which we can talk about in a few minutes. I thought that might be an option, but apparently not.
Well, like Thorin, Mata enjoys the Mad Skrilla, so...
Well, that's why IM would have been a good example, right? Because they've said, we are going to pay Chinese level money. They're sponsored by Longzhu, so we know they have the resources to do that, right?
We can talk about that more later in terms of why I'm necessarily skeptical of it being Chinese level money. But I do.
Well, even if it's not, a lot of these Korean players would it's better than what may be paid by some other teams in Korea, and also fundamentally, a lot of these players would rather take a slight pay cut, or even perhaps a 50% pay cut to stay in Korea. They don't want to be in China. A lot of these guys.
Yeah. A lot of them do, but a lot
and
of them
have a chance to win.
all
All of those players didn't have a chance to win essentially last year, so they all now are on a stacked teams. Anyway, what about the spot lane?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of problems with this.
And you say a lot of them want to be in China. The only person I know,
a lot of them like the Skrilla, is what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The only person I know who wants to be in China is Rookie.
Rookie really likes China.
He really likes it, right? I know he really likes it. I've actually spoken to Rookie about this.
He has a lot of fans. He loves it.
Oh, I see. So he's gotten a taste for the finer pizza. Reference game on point. My own references. My own life is self-referential. I'm like Proust or something. Again, people don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. So keep going, Kelsey. Keep going.
That was that great interview that he did before, like the KTA's Blue Final, where he said, "I know you all cheer for Kakao, but remember the rest of us." He goes to China, and it's like, Kakao who? Rookie. Yeah, that's right. That's my name. But anyway, back to Royal.
So some people, of course, want to be in China for the money, but I think if you gave the Korean players, even a lot of them, if you gave them a good deal in Korea, maybe not even a Chinese level deal, they'd take the Korean deal just to be in Korea.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I think that's probably true. But in terms of Royal Never Give Up, I think Mata is, notoriously a pill in China at least, and he's publicly come out and apologized to fans for being difficult and a bunch of other things recently.
What the fuck is a pill?
That was...
What is a pill? I never heard that statement before. What is that?
So, like, you've heard the expression, a tough pill to swallow.
Okay.
Like, that kind of...
Yeah, being a pill is kind of like being a pain in the ass in American slang, Thorin.
So you have to realize, Monty, when I first had a pill, it was great. I had an awesome experience. I can't relate at all. I don't know what they mean. What do you mean a tough pill to swallow? You just get a vodka orange, just get partying, Anyway, keep going, Kelsey.
You should stop mixing, That's a little bit dangerous right there.
That was my first clue that he was thinking of staying in China, was when he sort of came out and publicly apologized to fans for being so difficult or whatever. But I think he also, in those interviews where he talked about where he'd want to go, he also often talked about wanting to play with UZI. And Royal to UZI was supposed to be a thing for a while. That was something that several people have confirmed. Royal was going after UZI. They wanted the UZI Mata bottom lane. And then that kind of didn't work out. QG swooped in and picked it up. So I think it was one of those situations where, well, we could just give Mata to Whoosh, right, who is the current starting AD carry for Royal Never Give Up. But he probably will not like that. And Name was considering retiring. So I think maybe the prospect of playing with Mata or having Name stay on the team was something that appealed to Mata. Not really sure, but I think that Name was seriously considering retiring, so that's another reason why I'm not completely sure he's going to be focused this year. And there was also, like, just the entire situation with Royal last year. I think the fact that because he was transferred outside of transfer period and they had to wait 9 weeks to actually allow him to play in the LPL, and by that time the team was just kind of done. The fact that they bought back into the LPL, Zero was doing all these troll builds, Corrin was just declining and deteriorating and becoming worse like each subsequent game. There was weirdly a time where I felt like Insec was the player on the team that cared the most, and when you get to that situation, it's not it's just
That's because Insect's made so many mistakes in real life that the virtual world's the only place left for him at this point in time. Like, he actually he's like Lawnmower Man or something. He has to go ham in the virtual world. Why is my reference game all 80s and 90s stuff that no one's aware of? Anyway, whatever. One day this will be hailed as an incredible reference game. So it wasn't Whoosh the guy who, in the LPL spring playoffs, just played Vayne every single game when Vayne wasn't even a strong pick? Doesn't he just spam like hard carry champions?
He really likes Vayne. I think there are a lot of Chinese players who have a huge fixation on Vayne. One of my favorite pieces of information on UZI is that of champions he's played more than 10 games on, Vayne is actually his worst win rate, because he just picks it when he feels like he should be able to hard carry, and he picks it into these dumb situations, and it hardly works out. So even though people perceive it to be his best champion, he's actually lost quite a bit with it. So I think that there are a lot of Chinese players who are kind of like that with Vayne. I don't really, like, there's definitely this mentality that I should be able to style that I think is very prevalent.
But I mean, if he actually had to play, if the Whoosh guy actually had to play with Mata, do you think Mata could like bring out another level to him or make him a better player?
I think Whoosh is definitely better than all of the players that Mata played with last year. But he's like a very young guy. You can tell by looking at his face. And yeah, there's a possibility, I think, that Whoosh could improve with Mata, but I think that Mata maybe had the predilection of not necessarily wanting to play with an undeveloped AD carry again. He wanted to play with UZI, so.
See the way she said that, Monty? You can tell how young he is by looking at his face. I mean, obviously not by any sort of official paperwork. Like you say, wait a minute, how old is this guy? Oh, 17? Paperwork all checks out. So I guess he must be 17 years old. So
China would never lie about the age of their athletes. They've never done it before in perhaps previous Olympics. They don't have a track record of trying to send people to Worlds who might be 15. There's definitely never been any falsification of birth data. What a fucking joke.
I've got an edgy topic for you, Monty. Are you ready? So, you notice, as we were talking, Kelsey didn't just mention LSPL teams. She mentioned them as though there are LSPL teams that are literally owned by LPL teams, with direct connections sending players back and forth. And actually, you know what? Some teams even have farm teams on top of that. So, interestingly enough, in LCK, you can't have sister teams. That would be unethical somehow and destroy the integrity of the sport. You know, competitive integrity is everything.
They do have bench teams, though, that play in Challenger.
Okay.
Right.
So, you can't have NA teams. Okay, in theory you can have the second team. You can't have sister teams, etc. In theory, though, they send players directly between these teams. And in theory, remember, LSPL isn't Challenge. It's just another league.
Yeah, it's still according to the
Riot must consider it like Challenger, though.
Yeah, according to the League of Legends Association of Chinese Esports, which is kind of like Chinese KESPA, you can have one LPL and one LSPL team officially. Of course, unofficially, there are definitely organizations that have more than that, but...
Yeah, show corporation game, bitch.
Well, I mean, you can have... I mean, you can't have a challenger team if you are... And you can switch players, like if you're an LCS team and you have a challenger team.
Sure.
Yeah, and officially you can't actually... The transfer period rules still apply, even if you own both LSPL and LPL teams, which is why we couldn't really transfer Amazing J back to LSPL or Ray back to LSPL during the regular season after Korowin could play more games. So you have to stick with those players either benched or just on this. They can only play for the specific team during that period, even if you do own a secondary team.
I mean, I think the more troubling aspect of the LPL is the rumors that one ownership group or several owners own the vast majority of the teams. I mean, that's the real problem here, right? Is that no one actually knows who owns a lot of these teams, and it seems likely that singular owners own multiple LPL teams.
Listen, don't worry about that. Riot has their own ownership thing where they vet everyone and they make sure that you're someone who should be allowed to own a team, and they do this, the competitive integrity of the game, and so I'm sure they've checked it all out, Monty. Don't worry, they've done their due diligence.
My favorite thing, of course, is that Masters 3 used to be WE Academy, right? And their logo is literally just the M and the E flipped.
The W and the E flipped, you mean?
Yeah,
into
yeah,
M3.
the W and the E
yes.
into M3. So
also,
yeah, very obviously.
There have been a bunch of very weird roster movements where, like the King Royal roster movement last year, that seem blatantly suspicious because what motivation do you have to do that unless you own both of those teams?
And of course, King has now been sold. ZTR Esports, and before that they just transferred all the King players to Royal Never Give Up or Starhorn Royal Club, right? So it was very clearly
for anyone who doesn't know the backstory here, what happened was the Starhorn Royal Club team, which was basically the Worlds team but with Nama instead of Uzi because he'd left to OMG, played in the relegation match against King, lost the game, so then magically the entire King roster was cleaned out. The Starhorn Royal Club team that just lost the match was put onto the team that they just were lost to and just went right back into LPL again with the same 5 players.
Yes.
I mean, imagine if that happened in the West for a second. Like, just imagine that happens. Like, someone gets relegated,
that would not be allowed to happen.
But I mean, imagine the uproar if that did, where there was everyone was just like, a bit weird. Oh, okay, next LPL season. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange to say that that's
the whole thing is that it can't happen because if you are relegated in the LCS, you actually cannot purchase a slot in the LCS again, right, for the next split. So you could do a split afterwards, for example, but if a team gets relegated, then they can't just buy their way back in. That would be considered against LCS rules.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't verified through paperwork, but it's pretty obvious that Royal Never Give Up and King were owned by the same person, and
of course, because at that point, why do you do that? The question is, why would you even care if you own both of those teams? The point is because the Royal brand, because it's a 2-time world finalist, is probably more valuable than the King brand, which is why you would even make that decision in the first place.
See, I could never imagine a team with the initials RNG just fucking around and just having some sort of shenanigans, trying to evade rules, get around them, needing rules put in place to restrict their activities and get them on the straight and narrow. That would never happen. So, and then the ownership just magically changes, and that's how they get around it again. Get away with it again.
Really.
I mean, this stuff would never be allowed in the West, right? So.
Monty, why did you pick RNG as the name, bearing in mind Royal Never Give Up already existed?
Why did I pick the 3 letters RNG? Yeah. Well, this had been a long-term plan before I even knew about that, so I just kept doing it.
See, if you'd have named the team Ren, you could have named it after a shit Star Wars character that was a massive underwhelmment, and that in many ways would kind of fit, the philosophy you were going for there.
I guess. Okay. That's your opinion.
Edgy enough, okay. So I got everyone on that one, Mochi. I got everyone. So Do you think that this team can actually be good? Aside from the fact, obviously, there's all these question marks in the bot lane, but okay, if that, it doesn't have to go perfectly. They don't have to be the Name and Mata of old. Say they're just like above average bot lane. Can this team actually be good aside from them? Like, is Insec completely off the reservation? Can he still be a contributing player? Are the other players in the team going to be good enough?
Well, Insec probably won't play in the spring until summer when he is Chinese.
Because they'll play Looper instead?
Yeah, Zero and Insec will be Chinese in the summer split of this year. So, but I think that even without Name and Mata, you still have a roster that could be middle of the pack, like they kind of were last year. If Name and Mata are great, then I think that they can be a top team. I think that Royal did actually get better. So first of all, to dispel the conception that, they're suddenly really good because they're winning these off-season tournaments. They won 2 off-season tournaments. King, when they used to be King, they won or placed second in like almost every off-season tournament last year, only really losing to EDG. So it's just this weird thing that I don't quite understand, where that roster seems to do well in off-season tournaments.
And that was even before they were in LPL, right?
Right. That was right before they were about to join LPL. They'd qualified, but they hadn't played. Yeah. So it was just, it seems like it's weird that it's happening again. I do think that they did improve.
Is China like the fucking Poltergeist movies for you? Like, it's weird, it's happening again. What's going on here? It's strange
like really
activity.
Unfortunate to say that I don't understand it. Like, if I had to say something, I would say that, like, because they've been playing these tournaments with their Chinese roster while a bunch of other teams are in limbo, the same way as they did last year, they're able to find some success with that. So that's one possibility. Another thing is that in week 10, we actually saw Royal Never Give Up start to win more games in the LPL. And they went from a bottom 2 team to a team that maybe can make it into playoffs. And they were like 1 game off from making it into playoffs. If they had just 2-0'd VG Gaming instead of 1-1ing them, they probably would have made playoffs. Okay. But so I think that they did start to improve, and their improvements coincided with the team bringing back on Vaikal, who is the Korean coach that Starhorn Royal Club had in 2014. So I don't know if he necessarily can be given a lot of credit, but the biggest problem with, I think, Royal Never Give Up / King and LPL is that they just didn't seem to do anything a lot, and then suddenly MLXG was like super aggressive again, and he was doing all these invades and everything else. So I think that they just kind of needed an on switch of some kind.
So what I love about the fact that you can actually then declare your region as China eventually if you're Korean is I'm just waiting just for the novelty factor until they make an all Korean team.
It's LGD would definitely do it, I think. Like they're one of the teams.
It'll be great. Imagine that, Monty. They'll have actually done again the classic Chinese move. Yeah, you can only have 2 players per region. Oh, okay, does that last forever? Well, I mean, I guess eventually, they can probably declare for your region. Oh, okay, sir. Yeah, I'll only do that then. Yeah. Start planning for 2 years down the line.
I mean, realistically, we're looking at the start of all Korean teams in non-Korean regions, right? It's going to start in China this year. If somebody wants to get Insec and Zero, that's a possibility right there. Then you can take 2 more Korean players and you have virtually a whole Korean team by the spring. And by the end of summer, by the end of 2016, you're going to have a lot of options, including all the former Samsung players, to make an all-Korean team in China, right? Sure. And even now, there at the end of 2016, there are going to be options to make an all-Korean speaking roster in NA, because Impact and Piglet and Rush will all be available as NA players. So importing a couple Korean players on top of that. So this is only the beginning. Somebody's going to make an all-Korean team in many of these regions as soon as they possibly can.
So you realize the dream there obviously is what you just described. It's that after like 3 years of trying, they finally just put together the Samsung White team, right? And they just have that in China.
Well, they could do that at the end of this year, right?
But by that point in time, it's way too long. They're a shadow of their former selves. It's like watching the Rolling Stones in concert now, Yeah, you were a big fan of them in 1970, but like now, I mean, Monty, I would hate it if there was another episode of a show and it was all the old characters, but they weren't as good anymore. And you were like, I used to like them a while ago, but it's gotten old. They're trying to do the same shit again. Is this just for money? I wouldn't buy into a social phenomenon like that again. So anyway, I have a question for you here, Kelsey.
Okay.
What is your reservation about Name? Because even though people, again, there's no setting between God and shit in League of Legends.
Right.
For me, there's a spectrum. So he obviously wasn't as good as he was in 2014, but he was, at times, I'd say he was like a 7 out of 10.
I think he was still. There were a lot of times where he was still a top 580 carry for most of the summer in LPL, not internationally.
Sure.
And then I think that there, like initially in summer, he just kind of came in and he demolished his first couple of matches. Like they did really well, and there was still like King was kind of funny because almost towards the end of the split they had a top 2 gold lead at 20 minutes of all LPL teams, but they were like the epitome of the team that threw. So Name and Zero usually got a ridiculously good lead in lane. Like they had a really high first blood rate, everything else. But then the team would just like fall apart mid-game. Team fights, like their shot calling was abysmal, everything else. So Name actually took over the shot calling role because UCI used to have it. So it's very clear that he's not a good shot caller.
So do you have concerns this year? Should he be good this year? Do you have reasons to hope he's going to be good?
Like I said, so you know the meme about like Western players playing Hearthstone instead of
it's just
League
a meme. It never happened. That's all for cameras.
Real, you know?
So, okay.
So the game instead in China is DNF, which is like a beat 'em up game.
Okay.
So he played a lot of DNF on stream in summer. So this was like a big thing. It's just obviously he doesn't care anymore.
He's the tasteless of Chinese AD carries, Monty. Little inside joke there. So keep going, yeah.
So my reservation is just, okay, is he going to come in with the same kind of motivation that he appeared to have this summer? Or is he just going to be done?
I've got a theory
because
for you.
he did consider retiring, so.
I've got a theory for you here. So here's the thing, okay? So the original reason as to why everyone supposedly hates Name, okay? I thought it's because, his style of... He is like sort of like a villain type character. His style of play is like late game, so he just breaks the heart of your team when you think that they're about to beat them, he wins the big team fight at the end. He obviously isn't like a very charismatic person, a very personable guy. Seems like a bit of a brooding loner type. So here's the thing. When I asked Ryan Louet, I said to him, why does everyone hate Name? Because you have to realise, and in case anyone doesn't know, when I meet people in real life, I don't say like, hello, how are you? I just say stuff like, here's the one thing you could tell me that I don't want the answer to now, sir. So I asked him, I said, why does everyone hate Name? And he said, and he did that Chinese thing where he's like looking for the words to say, and then he just goes, he fucked too many fans. And I was like, sorry, did I miss it? Like, what did he say? He's like, he fucked too many fans. I'm like... Too many, you say? Didn't even know that was a concept possible, but okay. Let's accept the premise. So he fucked. The wording's key here, Monty. He didn't fuck fans. That's fine. We all know that's okay. But he fucked too many fans. He was like exorbitant in his fucking of fans. He just indulgent. It was disgusting what he was doing. So anyway, here's the problem. When you're on that kind of a sick heater, Monty, let me just tell you my own experiences when I went to a foreign country and I got a little roll going, okay. I'd have them on Monday, Tuesday, and then I better take a break. I need to R&R, but then that Tinder message comes in, well, maybe I could squeeze one in tonight. So you're on this little sick little heater, you're in the zone. You can't miss, It feels like the bucket's a mile wide, Everything's going in, Monty. So you're on this sick heater. What happens is you actually start to think this is easy, in fact, you know what, is there even anything to this? Like, this is actually kind of vacuous, a bit empty, beyond the initial novelty, beyond the sensory pleasures of making a lot of baskets in a basketball metaphor. You eventually get to you're like, you know what, I think I'm going to take a break from this actually. There's got to be something more to life. Like, I'm not really that into this anymore. But you know what, after about 3 to 6 months, you start to think to yourself, why did I ever give that up? I haven't been around it in a while. I could go back to that lifestyle. Like I could. Let's try it out again. So the problem, if you're following the analogy so far, Monty, is that to fuck a lot of fans, you need to have fans. Now, even when he was really winning a lot of tournaments, Name didn't have that many fans. In fact, I've told you before, his team didn't even win Team of the Year despite winning every tournament except 2, which is like you really are disliked at that point in time. Meanwhile, they gave Team of the Year to a team who won 0 competitions. So that's literally just like the whole world like, no, we actually hate you. We're just going to use the democratic process just to say we hate you.
All goes to OMG, baby.
So the key thing is he needs to get fans back again. So the only way he's going to get fans back is by playing well, and then he can fuck them. So there we go. I've laid it out for you.
The cycle of Name's skill continues.
Exactly.
So under your assumption, then he will actually get significantly better because he needs to make fans again. So it's the cycle of Name where it all is around. Okay. Gotcha.
Plus, here's the thing, Monty. I've mentioned this to you on previous shows. There's a theory that the reason why war is a disgusting concept is because war is always fought by young men on behalf of old men, and those are 2 sets of people who, in general, don't actually get to have sex, Monty. So what happens is old men, they are past the age of really being productive in that sense, and so that whole energy goes into like frustrations and anger at the world, and they see only destruction as the solution. So they take young men, these virulent sexual animals of phallic energy, the solar energy of the world, Monty, they take them and they pit them against each other, sublimating that psychosexual force into war. One of the most disgusting
like a very
principles.
Terrible theory about the
Listen,
nature of war.
let me keep going with this. So here's the thing, Monty.
No, we're still on Name. Okay.
Are you ready?
This isn't just war.
So Monty became. So Name became Name became drained by his over exertion with fans. But now that he's been denied that for a while, he will sublimate his sexual desire into his play like a monk, and it will elevate his consciousness to a level where he will dominate again. There's my theory and my analysis on this tournament. Now that's why, guys.
This also explains your work output.
Explains a lot, mate. Explains a lot. Put it this way, my work output is directly proportional to, we'll just call it the happiness in life. We'll say there's an inverse relationship there. Okay.
That's why you have to go back, leave Korea every few months so you can actually get some work done, right?
Exactly. And then I come back and I knock it out the park. I knock the bottom out, as I like to say. It's a nice little saying. I knock the bottom out, Monty. So, anyway, do you want to jump in here anywhere, Kelsey? Has this sparked any theories in you?
I mean, another explanation for people hating Name is that he shit talks too much. So maybe that's just a bad
shit talks too much. Again, it's the wording there, too much. I mean, again, is it possible to shit talk too much? Some of us make whole careers off that. If you're good, people should admit it, even if you shit talk too much. That's my philosophy.
Little did he know he could just come to the US and be a content creator, and he could live the lifestyle that he chooses.
Yeah. I'll even teach him how to direct his psychosexual energy so that he is freed from that burden. So,
all right, calm down there, Dr. Freud.
Okay. See, I have to complete Name's training. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so anyway.
Or I guess, or Europe, because you live in London, so.
Well, obviously, yeah.
Yeah.
So, is there any other team? Okay, there's one more team we have to talk about in China. I mean, the rest of them are all irrelevant and doesn't matter. But there's one more team that's also irrelevant, doesn't matter, but we have to talk about because of the context of history. So, isn't this the true death of OMG this year? Won't 2016 be the death of OMG as a relevant team?
I can't possibly see them doing well. Like, most people are predicting that they'll be relegated this spring. They've already signed SMLZ, which I don't even understand, because SMLZ, from my opinion, was the worst AD carry in LPL. And they had an AD carry North who actually did pretty well in the few games.
Yeah, he delivered too.
Yeah, he wasn't UZI, so they still have North, so I don't understand why they wouldn't just play him. Maybe North is just scarred from constantly being compared to UZI and having all of UZI's fans tell him to die constantly, so...
Maybe that's what happened to Name as well.
Yeah, maybe that as well. So, I don't really understand why they went for that. Supposedly, TBQ we know is in the OMG gaming house. It hasn't been announced that he's signed yet, but it's looking
just lock the doors and burn it down. Just lock the doors and burn it down.
After the high-profile acquisition of Uzi, like, this is their response the next year? Why?
And Jue, the jungler they had that was somewhat promising. Again, like another sort of amateur player. They transferred him to Masters 3, so they would probably have to play TBQ. The other thing is that there were recent interviews with San and Loveling where they both said that they might be interested in playing again someday. So it would be really hilarious if like UZI is on the team, they all retire, he leaves, they all come back. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think San is actually going to become a commentator, and Loveling is joining the OMG management. So
okay.
Yeah, we'll see.
Oh, I had one more team to ask. We haven't asked you this yet. We discussed it on the last show, I believe. What
Okay.
do you actually think of EasyHoon joining Vici Gaming?
I think this team is going to be pretty overrated, but Vici was overrated last year, too. It's because of the Dandy and Mata. I don't see how EasyHoon joining is necessarily, and losing Mata is necessarily an upgrade, because I think that you have Long, who will have to be like the more aggressive carry style player of the team now, but he's inconsistent. He was a pretty good player on Unlimited Potential, but then again, he was like the second best player on a team that got relegated. And you have Dandy, who's going back to jungle, and I think there's an inherent communication problem with Korean junglers that they keep bringing up when people talk to them, is just that like jungle is the hardest role to play with a language barrier, just because I think there are some times where their laners are just doing things that they don't understand why they're doing them. And so you have games like Kakao's Skarner game where he literally did 800 damage to champions the entire game because he didn't know what he was doing at Worlds, right? So I think that Dandy isn't going to be as great as he once was, obviously, with a lot of problems. EasyHoon will be great for holding lane and stuff, but again, if you don't have a great aggressive carry style player, what are you doing? And then their bottom lane right now is Endless, who I just watched him play Misfortune at World Cyber Arena, and it was like the worst MF ults I've ever seen in my life.
Endless used to be a mid laner, right?
Endless is actually an AD carry main who played. No, wait, never mind. I think this is Schwan, excuse me, who is now on Unlimited Potential, but no, I don't know. They move their AD carry and their mids back and forth all the time. Endless did play mid a little bit, just because they didn't have a mid laner when they played NESO.
Right.
So that's why they played Endless mid. Endless, I think, is an AD carry main. So, and
Are
he
you not
played
glad
with Mata
to get
for a while.
Hitong the fuck out of the mid lane at least?
Yeah. Hitong went to Unlimited Potential, so that's good.
Okay. Right, I think that's almost all the Chinese moves that are significant for right now. So, okay, before we talk about Korea, let me ask you this, Monty. So obviously this is the first show we've done since the IEM tournament. What did you actually think of the EVA team after that tournament? Because remember, coming into the tournament, you actually said from things you'd heard, you thought they would maybe be underwhelming and maybe it wouldn't be a good tournament. But in the end, they won.
They did win, but it was a pretty sloppy final, honestly, against QG, and I think that both teams showed that they had a lot to improve on. I was more impressed with their semifinal match than I think I was with their play in the finals, but I thought their draft was generally pretty solid, and I mean, obviously many people, including myself, really like watching Loken and Key. They're a very exciting duo lane. I think people tended to underrate Crazy. I actually think that he's a pretty interesting new talent in the top lane. I think Ares and Athena are kind of whatever, meh. Mediocre players, at least at the moment. Gu, I mean, they did about what I expected them to do at that event.
Does that mean EVA has some kind of great coach, do you think? If they're having this great draft at that point in time? Do you think the players were involved in
Possibly.
it?
I don't know EVA well enough yet because I just haven't spent a lot of time around them or observed them enough to really understand their system or who their coach is or which players contribute, just because they haven't been a champions team. And they rose after Worlds, so
Sure.
I mean, I just haven't really,
Well, that's
had
the interesting thing.
the same
'cause
level of interaction with them.
remember, the excuse in the West is, oh, Korean infrastructure is so OP. Well, come on, the infrastructure for fucking ever is no way it's better than the amount of resources some of the Western teams have. Yet their pick ban was consistently very good.
It was. They had a good read on the meta, which is why one of the reasons why they won Kespa Cup in the first place, right? They had an advantage coming into that patch because a lot of teams hadn't, like the Tigers and like SK Telecom, didn't have a lot of practice on that patch yet. So I think they have a good read on the meta. Where that's coming from, I can't really say at this point in time because I just haven't had a chance to really meet this team or see how they work.
So I saw you wrote some about the tournament, in particular Ever and all the other team, Xiaogu. What did you actually think of Ever in this IEM, Kelsey?
I think that they played pretty well. Like people have been saying, Key is really, really great support. So he's fun to watch. I think that, yeah, I mostly agree with Monty's assessment that I think they had a pretty good read on the meta that got them pretty far. I think that, weirdly enough, they had somewhat of a QG problem in their laning phases in terms of they had a little bit of confusion, but they did really well, like mid-late games, because they had really strong understanding of multiple globals, being able to initiate fights that way. So I think that was probably the thing that impressed me the most about them.
What, Monty, in this tournament, this is just a little question I had that I didn't really see addressed that much. Do you think in the tournament, as it went on, Mundo was an underrated pick? Because it seemed like the times that people got it was very strong.
Mundo's an incredibly strong pick. A lot of these champions that ever since the last Whisper nerfs came through, anybody that is ultra tanky is pretty much unkillable because at a certain point, burst mages aren't going to kill Mundo before he can actually ult, and the 80 carry that does more consistent DPS, when you get enough armor, just doesn't do the same amount of damage that they used to, which is another reason why Trundle is so strong right now, because he can take those stats and get ultra tanky himself. So yes, Mundo is an extraordinarily strong pick at the moment, I would say.
Do you think that the patch will remain that way going into next year?
I hope not. I think the last Whisper changes were stupid. I don't get it.
Would it be sad for you if we are destined to now go into another era of like super tanks?
Yeah, I don't particularly like those times myself.
Are you a fan of them, Kelsey? Do you like the eras of Trundle and Mundo?
To an extent, I like it because I like watching zone control and team fights, and I think that tends to happen a lot with those champions. But the sad thing is that there tends to be like a few that are really, really good. So those are the ones that they pick over and over again. So we just see the same ones. So that's the part I don't like.
Are you secretly hoping this revives Koro 1? Is this like the kiss from the prince that wakes him up to who he was again?
I think Koro 1 has more carry dimensions than people have given him credit for. I think that this tournament was more of a problem, but he's played a lot of stuff in spring. Like he played the Cassidon, he played the Aurelia, he played a bunch of different carry things. But I do think, yeah, for sure he's better at tanks.
See, Carry Dimensions actually sounds like a Chinese team. That could be a name.
One of my favorites was I actually watched the LSPL qualifier, and there was literally a team called Esports for a Dream. So that was
God.
There we go. That's
That's great.
They've captured it, Monty. Esports for a dream.
Esports
what I like about that is I think
is there like a lot of heroin in esports?
That's the thing, Monty. I think naively that's just broken English, but they don't know. They've made it perfect because they've just taken Requiem for a Dream and made it Esports for a Dream, and it's just going to end up with some AD carry
tests in LSPL now.
It's going to end up with some AD carry doing the same thing over and over again until it just costs him his.
The interesting thing is that they started cracking down on visas for illegal Korean players in TGA. And 4 teams were disqualified from TGA, the LSPL qualifier, for having illegal Korean immigrants.
What happens, Monty, is they go into the team house.
Kelsey, what does that mean?
They go into the team house, right, and they're like, "Oh, what is it?"
They don't have the proper paperwork or work visas to actually play for a Chinese team.
I thought this was this was some more Chinese skullduggery where they like falsified their birth records for them to be Chinese instead of Korean. Which you know what?
Sad thing is, I've joked about that before. He was Korean. He was Chinese the whole time.
Could happen.
I just didn't realize Faker is actually Chinese, Monty. It's going to happen.
I would laugh so hard if they tried that.
Okay, I've got a question for you. One of the things I thought was a bit unfair about IEM was the way people talked about Chao Gu. Like, every game, everyone made out like they were total shit. Yet, if you've actually watched Chao Gu play, it's not like they just beast people and just wreck them with super clinical play. Actually, they looked a bit worse, but they still won, and it made sense why they won, and their style worked and was effective and got them to the final and almost won the fucking tournament. People bagged on them from fucking Dignitas onwards.
Yeah, QG. That's the thing.
I mean, to be
about
fair,
them
they
is
did almost lose to Dignitas. They did almost lose to Dignitas. But
mate, that's pretty good if you can come back from that.
See, this is what I don't understand. Going back to our first conversation tonight, it's like, well, they always lane swap to this specific situation. Therefore they split the games. Can't we just agree that QG is like the massive 50% team that in all these situations
you've missed your analogy, Monty.
They either go barely winning against Dignitas and barely losing to Ever. Can't we just agree that they're the coin flip of teams?
They're the unicorns of love of China.
They actually didn't split 1-1 the most in the LPL. Vici Gaming did. And they were tied with like 5 other teams for splitting 1-1. So it's just a China thing. Like, they're all coin flip teams. No, but yeah, QG, I can't imagine something more stressful than being a QG fan, because it's like they almost always almost win or almost lose given their style of play. They fall behind so far, and this is why UZI could actually be good for them, because he might be able to give them more of an early game dimension that I don't really see them having consistently with their current roster.
What do you think, since you covered China and now you also cover EU, what do you think of EU adopting best of 2? Can you give anyone some insights as to what that might mean or how it tends to go?
So I think that there's this weird bias in the League of Legends community that seems to be that more games are better, which I don't think is necessarily true, especially if
I really don't understand the EU freak out about this best of 2. I think it's a perfectly fine system.
Yeah, so I think the big concern seems to be that they won't get as much practice. I really like the best of 2 format because I think, you minimize side advantage by having each, like, it doesn't matter, because people might say, well, the next time they face, the other team can have 2 blue side games, but then the meta will be completely different, and the side advantage might be changed drastically. So I think the best of 2 is good for that. I think that there's actually more of a reward for just consistently winning every game in a best of 2 format, because if you win 2 games, you get 3 points. If you win one best of 3, you get 1 point, right? So teams that are really, really good can get really, really far ahead and secure
like
their
EDG?
place. Yeah, like EDG in a best of 2 format, so they can get really rewarded just by being good and preparing for every game. So I think that there are a lot of upsides to best of 2 that haven't been necessarily discussed in depth. I think that Europe in best of 2 won't be disadvantaged to best of 3 like that. I think that'll probably end up being about the same in terms of being quality or not. And I think the bigger concern is just the number of games for broadcasts that Europe gets. Like, I think that's the bigger problem. So
I've got a good anecdote to just trigger you. Okay, you ready?
Okay.
So I was once talking to someone in some possible tenuous way, you'll never know, associated with Riot, and I was discussing like policy things, like why do they do things a certain way, why do they do it like this way, and I said to the person, like, actually I think a problem in the West is because there's so little series play, how are they supposed to understand how to play in series except in scrims? So as a result, when they come to pick ban in the second game of a series, technically they've only been preparing for the first game every time. So I made this point, quite a simple analogy to make. It's not exactly some revolutionary point to make. So I said to him, even though this obviously doesn't entirely explain it, I think it would help Western teams if they played series more often than just the playoffs, so that we didn't have scenarios like Gravity, where they are so good in the best of ones, and then in a series they struggle to even understand what their approach is. So I made this point, and here was his counterpoint, Kelsey. He said to me, But if that's the case, and that's why internationally the the Western teams don't do well, because they don't play series, then shouldn't they be better than the Asian teams in group stages? Because they're best of ones. At which point, I sort of tried to just hold it together. I tried to just say, just don't think about what he said. Just keep your personality together. Keep your mind intact. If you let the thought into your brain, it could destroy everything about you, and this whole reality could unravel. And I almost managed it, but I can't lie, it tilted me a bit. My eye was twitching a little bit. Blood came out of my nose, but then I just had to excuse myself. Like, it's been nice meeting you, Mr. Riot. Now I have to go. My planet needs me, and then I left. So that was sort of how it went. What do you think of that, Kelsey? What do you think of it as a working theory? It's a model. It's certainly a type of model. It's a hypothesis.
I don't think that preparing for 2 games makes you disadvantageous in a best of one. Like, LGD actually said that they think they don't do as well in best of ones, and I just kind of went, okay, why? Why do you feel like that?
Well, the key thing is I actually said to him, you realise the flaw in your statement, sir. I obviously never said sir. I wouldn't call anyone sir, mate. So I said, you realise the problem, your flaw in your statement is that a best of one is the first game.
Yeah.
So actually, every single time they play a best of 3, they're practicing for a best of 1 and a best of 3. He looked at me a little bit blankly. He understood the words. I think he'd heard them before, but not the way they fit together and the idea they tried to convey. And he just sort of said competitive integrity and then disappeared. And that was the end of the story. It was a strange encounter. I can't explain it very well. And I've been wondering about it ever since. Did it happen? Was it all in my mind? We'll never know. It's sort of like a comedy sketch. Did my boss really say that to me, or did I have a punchline prepared that I reverse engineered a fake boss to say to me? You'll never know on this show. Spoiler, they're all lies. So anyway, continue on. So now let's go into the Korean region. So about 5 minutes left on the show. So, okay, in the Korean region, first and foremost, we have this huge rumor at the moment that Incredible Miracle will get Flame. Now, did you hear that, Kelsey? Flame will go to Incredible Miracle. That is the team he will be going to. I don't want you to get confused here at all. Also, this has an official basis when I tell you this, so I'm not just trying to get your hopes up or anything and then see you dashed before the rocks. I think maybe you like to... You've got like Munchausen by proxy. You like to cause others pain so they have to experience the pain that you felt inside when everything went shit. So anyway, just another in-joke there. What do you think of the idea of Flame going to this, at the moment, quite stacked team for... IM, where the only player we don't know is the AD carry at the moment.
Okay, wait, before you say that, we kind of do know who the AD carry is because Pure has been duoing incessantly with Fury, the former Samsung player who's banned for a month. So it does seem likely that Fury is actually going to be going to Incredible Miracle just based on what's been going on in solo queue.
Okay. So we will label this chapter of Incredible Miracle Run. Are you ready? You'll like this. The Flame and the Fury.
It's actually super good.
So there's a good one for you. So you can use that if it ever works. So what do you think, Kelsey, of the idea of Flame? Because obviously you got to watch. You're one of the few people who actually got to watch every game of him in theory, if you watched them all. What do you think of the notion of him going to this IM team, which has Coco, potential hard carry mid laner? Chaser was considered by many aficionados of Korea the best jungler. What do you think of Flame going back to Korea?
So remember how earlier I said that LGD sent 5% of their ganks top? That wasn't just exclusive to when they played with Acorn. I think that Flame actually had a lot of good utility performances from behind this year on LGD. So I think that he's become a pretty well-dimensioned, has a lot of different facets that he can bring to the lineup, and the conception that he's just a carry player now is not accurate. So I think that even if Coco and Chaser and Fury are all high resource or whatever, then Flame can fill that role, or Flame can play a carry role if the other players set back. So I don't really necessarily see there being a big flaw to this. Flame has like a good practice ethic. I mean, he probably has a few attitude problems, but so does every good player.
Everyone with talent does.
So it's and I think that he's pretty happy to be back in Korea, so I think he'll do fine.
Okay, Monty, what do you think of this move, if it indeed goes through?
I think that this is looking like a really solid team. I think Pure was underrated last season. I think Pure did fine with OQ. I think he's a maybe slightly above average support. He's obviously not going to be the greatest support of all time. At least he wasn't, given what we've seen from the past year. But I think he's solid, and I think that if Flame is paired with Chaser and Coco and Fury, that is an incredibly strong lineup and exciting for IM.
So you know I mentioned on a past episode that some as yet to be named source told me that Flame was going to SK Telecom, and I told you part of the reason I wanted that to happen, Monty, is not just so you could potentially win LCK, win Worlds, but that in doing so I would then make the joke to fuck with all those assholes who write for like LoL esports and all the sites. I would be like, I guess Flame is the best player in SKT. Faker had like an off season, kind of got carried again to another Worlds. I've realised I actually got a bit sad when it didn't happen, because I thought, well, now I can't do those jokes. It will be even better, Monty, if he beats Faker's SK Telecom on a team that was fucking IM. So now I'm just going to say he single-handedly did it. He took IM from nothing, much like, I should have used the analogy about the Carthaginians in this one, but he took them from nothing. He took them, defeated the ultimate team who won Worlds, who just transferred an MVP into the top lane position, and then won Worlds as well. So I'm not setting my expectations too high or anything, just win LCK, just one of the two. I'm not greedy, just one of the two, and then win Worlds, and then I think that's fair. It's reasonable.
I mean, it's scary to think that
it could happen though.
Has such an incredibly strong roster. It's fun for old StarCraft fans, because of course they were one of the best teams in StarCraft history at one point, and they had StarCraft 2, sure. So yeah, StarCraft 2, yes, of course, not StarCraft 1, StarCraft 2, where they had players like Nesty and MVP and won ridiculous numbers of tournaments, and they weren't ever able to take that success and transfer it into League of Legends. But now that they have this Longzhu money, they've been able to snap up a lot of really good players. I think it's cool to continue that legacy, and it's fun to see. It'll be fun to see what they can do with this.
See, the great thing about that is that really does make me... The fact it's called Longzhu is amazing, because obviously, again, Chinese people pick the best names, but they never know what the joke is. So it's like, I need that long paper. If I'm going to join a fucking IM team, I need that long paper, son. And then they're just like, yeah, Longzhu, like, we've got the money for you. Like, no, you don't understand. So anyway, Monty, I've got a tweet for you I'd like to read out, because this is just top quality. You have to understand all the context of the joke to get it, but it's fantastic if you do. So let me just find where it was. Okay, here we go. So when the rumor happened that Flame would go to IM, here's what the guy said, okay? He said, I think Flame will make a great sub for Lilac. It'll be like Easy Hoon and Faker, but I hope they keep Lilac for the important games. Pretty good, right? It's well crafted. I like that. That's well crafted. It's so fucking cynical and hateful of life itself, but I like it. I like the way it's put together. That.
I mean, Longzhu is actually Dragon Ball, so.
Is it?
Yep. Long is Dragon and Ju is Ball. So.
Okay. So essentially, the only way you can get this team together is by assembling all the Dragon Balls.
Little dragon with a ball, so. Okay.
So the only way, see Monty, I did it finally. That's how I got Flame in his career to for once have a good fucking jungler. I had to assemble the Dragon Balls, and in doing so, I brought Incredible Miracle back to life. It's like 2012 up in this motherfucker.
I actually don't want to believe Kelsey right now, but that's
good,
true.
I mean, yeah, it is. It's true. They also are the streaming platform of PLU, which was the team that used to run the OPL. So, or not the team, excuse me, the organization. So just some Longzhu information there.
Do you remember when LS came on the show? No, not the second time, Monty. I don't want to trigger you. The first, well, I think the second, it might have been the second time. I think it was the third one where he came on and just said a load of stuff we just said a lot of stuff. Okay. But there was a time when he came on and he gave that like 15-minute analogy about TSM using Dragon Ball Z. And the whole time you were just sat there like bemused the whole time. You looked like a dog watching a card trick. I could see in your eyes you didn't know any of the things he was talking about. And the best part is, I think at the end he tried to imply like, you know what I mean? Like, no, nobody knows what you mean, motherfucker. I mean, I'm sure, listen, I have no doubt, Monty, if you did know Dragon Ball Z, it's probably a wicked analogy. If there's one thing actually that LS is good at, he's actually good at coming up with abstract analogies to like shows or things that don't have anything to do with games. In fact, here's a great story for you, Monty. So he actually said in a video, and he said this to me in real life. In a video, he said to people, like, guys, if you want to understand League of Legends, all you've got to do is watch this movie. And I looked up what movie he's talking about, and it's a Street Fighter anime movie. And I watched this movie. And at the end of the movie, here's the great thing, Monty. I understood what he meant, because I know LS. The key thing is, it wasn't the movie. The movie didn't help me at all. But knowing LS and the way he thinks, I understood what he meant, which is that within the concept of the movie, there's like like the meta game of how the different characters advance in their training and which one counters which. If you could really understand that as a very abstract concept, you could then take it out, apply it to League of Legends, and it would actually help you understand some of the game. The problem with that is, LS just said, watch this movie, it will teach you everything you need to know about League of Legends. I said, LS, that actually doesn't work. You've totally failed there, because you have to explain what it explains about League of Legends. You can't just tell someone to go and watch the fucking Matrix and go, pretty much all you need is to know about laning, right? Look, how is it? What's that got to do with laning? You got to tell me your insights, LS. And anyway, just a little rant there for LS. So a rant for LS, rant for an LS. That's my movie, Monty. Rant for an LS.
We're back. We're bringing it full circle.
Back in the room. Okay. What do you think? Here's a question for you, Monty. Since Ever didn't qualify for LCK, and now they've lost the Athena guy, do you think they will just be torn to shreds by the other teams? Will they just disappear into obscurity until the next LCK qualifier? What do you think?
Who? Ever?
Ever.
Well, I mean, as we discussed earlier, Athena already is gone. So that's somewhat disappointing.
And he's gone.
Yep.
And it's gone. The whole thing's gone.
Interestingly, he signed as a free agent, so that suggests to me that he had left Ever, or that players had left Ever prior to, so it wasn't a direct transfer.
Or maybe they just had no contracts.
Yeah. So
we will find out.
What do you think, Monty, about the new CJ Entus lineup? Aren't they a great organization?
I mean, I think what CJ's trying to do is just wait until BDD turns 17, right? Because he actually is a very exciting new player. And I'm very curious. I think he is incredible mechanically. He's one of the most exciting rookies mechanically that I've ever seen. So it could. I
mean, there was
really
Santorin.
So let's be honest,
back
though.
to that.
Prior to Kespa Cup, would you have rated Scout extremely highly? This is the question. Okay, just checking.
I think you did say Scout had potential or something, right?
I think he can be good. Just because somebody's great mechanically, we don't know how BDD is going to play in the professional scene. So I'm just saying, from a purely mechanical perspective, but obviously there's a lot more to the game than that.
As TSM will find out. But anyway, so what was your reason for asking that, Kelsey? Do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm just wondering, because I know that Scout had a fair amount of hyper pressure going into Kespa Cup, and then people kind of
He played one game, Kelsey.
I know he did, but I'm saying people, for whatever reason, fizzled out afterwards. I just know that the debuts of the big hyped rookies rarely pan out immediately. At least, like it's
sure
we have bigger. So I'm just trying to modulate my expectations on BDD, because I've heard a lot of people talk about how good he is. So that's all.
Of course. I totally agree with you. There's no way to know exactly how he's going to do, but what I'm excited is to start seeing him play. I don't have a lot of expectations that he's going to be a huge level of player in terms of the team play or the finer aspects of the game immediately. But in terms of exciting new 17-year-old rookies, we haven't had one that I feel is as interesting as him in a while.
See, what happened with Scout, Monty, is it's like the no true Scotsman fallacy. So when someone like that fails, then everyone just goes, well, he was never actually a really good player anyway, so he didn't fail. He just was never good. It's like they can't lose, essentially, the people who hype players. I've got a question that I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, Monty. So normally, the players that move to China are either no-namers who were around the Korean scene but weren't relevant in any way, or they're really good players and we're sad to see them go because they're probably going to go to shit and play with morons. So there's a scenario, Monty, where this isn't either of those scenarios. It's just players who shouldn't be allowed to play in Korea anymore, and it's just essentially getting rid of the trash. Like, this is like I have a big bag of trash and I'm walking along and a beggar says, can I have that? And I go, well, I guess, there you go. So Watch and Goong have both gone to China. Great news, right, Monty? Good riddance. Enjoy the money. See ya. Enjoy the rest of your career. What do you think?
I don't care about that at all. I think that Goong had plenty of chances to play well this past year and was just really underwhelming for the most part.
Yep. I mean, at this point, if I was on a Riot broadcast, I'd probably awkwardly... In fact, the title of my news post... I often like to imagine, Monty, fantasize about what would happen if I was a LoL esports writer. So my news post would be titled, Goong, Goong, Gone. And, that would be the title. And then,
shouldn't that have been Go-Going's retirement too? Go-Going, gone?
Missed opportunities.
Yeah, could have been, exactly.
Come on, Kelsey, where were you? The score writer.
It's writing boring titles, I guess.
Was Watch actually any good last season?
He was thoroughly mediocre. Not anything to get terribly excited
I
about.
don't think this is a controversial statement for you, Monty, but I imagine this will be for some people who watch League of Legends. Watch is probably one of the most overrated Koreans in the history of League of Legends, because people got so hyped in that story that I hate of anyone who goes to lots of worlds must be an amazing player. So we had Dyrus, then we had Yellowstar, then we had Watch. Watch wasn't the reason they were going to these worlds. What happened was, whichever team they thought in the national organisation could go to worlds, they put Watch onto that team. They loaded him up onto the teams that they thought had the best chance. He wasn't some talismanic genius player, awesome, brilliant jungler. He was just a above average jungler for most of his career, and that was about it. Am I wrong?
I don't think he was ever that great, so I can't say that you were wrong.
All you need to know is the old joke. He was Macnoon's third summoner spell. There we go. That's all. No one says that about fucking Dandy, do they? Oh, it's Lupus' third summoner spell. No, he was Lupus' whole fucking life. He was basically that character that sits below Nunu. That was him. Lupa was the little guy on top. I don't know anything about the fucking lore of League of Legends. I don't care about new champions in League of Legends. Okay, so Deadpool's coming in League of Legends or something. Anyway, let's keep it going.
So, I mean, this is the perfect example of what we were talking about earlier with the streaming platforms just paying some of the salaries. Yeah. Watch, people in China think Watch is great. They like that he's pretty. They like that he goes to Worlds. So, of course, he's a good pickup for...
Plus, I don't know what it is. I always used to think he's overrated, but there's something about people who are fans of Watch that it just repulses me now. I just try to stay clear of that nowadays, So anyway... Oh, good news, Monty. I love it when our heroes return. I love it when we can remember our past crimes and sins. So, he's back. It's your boy Hachani, and he's back on KT roster. What do you think, Monty? No. You thought the demon had been exorcised. He's back. So, what do you think?
I mean, he's just a sub, so he probably...
You say that now. What if he gets back in the starting lineup?
I don't think so. I think Ignar is much better than Hachani, so that won't be an issue.
Okay. And obviously, Ignar can play because they don't have any sort of visa issues. They don't have to get him. He already lives in Korea. His own Korean family won't advise him not to play in Korea for his team. So the way's clear for him to play again, as he did before. What do you think about... Okay, I've got a question for Kelsey here. So what does Kelsey think about Duke joining SK Telecom? Because obviously you weren't that... You didn't feel the other end of that where Marion went to LGD. Is Duke joining SK Telecom a good move?
I like Duke. Yeah, I think Duke is potentially a good move. Everyone brings up the shot calling aspect, of course, but I think just because allegedly Duke doesn't talk much. So, but I think that I've been pretty much consistently impressed with Duke for a while. I mean, since he was Leopard, right? So, I don't know. He's shown a lot of different dimensions since he used to be a pretty much Renekton only player. So,
well, his teleport usage has gotten better too, but he's still primarily a lane dominant player at this point. But if we just look at Koma's track record of taking players and turning them into absolute monsters, he doesn't have to do much work with champion pool or laning with Duke. It's mostly about team communication and teleport usage, right? So.
Yep.
No, I expect that to be a great move. Oh, another person as well, Monty, another reach from the past is Fly is back, and he's on KT roster as well. Now, here's an interesting anecdote about Fly. He's a player where there are way too many players in League of Legends called Fly. There's at least 3. One's a coach, one's a... Here's the best part. One is the guy who actually was the coach of, I think it was Roccat. His name was
Yes.
Fly, and here's a little anecdote.
Oh, the
for you.
manager.
Yeah, manager. So when I did a show that was a Western show about League of Legends, he was one of the people I had on the show, Fly, the manager of Roccat. And my producer at On Gamers just went to Esportspedia, typed in Fly, took the name, I'll even find it for you just to show you how ridiculous this is, took the name fucking Kim Sang-chul, put that underneath a guy who's obviously from like fucking Bulgaria or something, and was like, I'm helping, this is right, isn't it? There's only one person called Fly. I was like, come on, it'd be one thing if it was like some other guy. His name's fucking Kim Sang-chul. Like, are you out your fucking mind, mate? Can we be serious here? So yeah, that actually happened, but now I'm out on my own, so don't worry about it. So now I produce all the shows, Monty, so we're back in the promised land.
I'm the producer now.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
going to, speaking of Kim Sang-chul, he's going to be the new head coach of Royal Never Give Up, so.
The former tip coach and junior
Yes.
coach.
Yes, so.
I don't understand the way coaching works in China, because they seem to just rotate them.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think you have to, if you are a Korean coach, you have to have been in the environment for a while to be effective, so good luck. That's all I have to say.
Fair enough.
They still have Vical, so maybe that will be helpful.
Okay. What do you think KT will do over the loss of... Like, what's actually happening in KT, Monty? Have they lost any of their players? Any of the starters?
I think KT, it'll be interesting. I think I'd actually like to hear Kelsey's opinion, because I didn't actually get to see much of Fly in the LSPL last year.
Okay.
And people have told me that he wasn't great.
So I think your opinion has to vary. I think one of the biggest problems with Young Glory is that they didn't necessarily have a main carry, but they had a bunch of players who were good that could support a main carry well, and so eventually Fly sort of had to develop into that role. And I think that he surprised me a little bit that he wasn't able to be consistently the star that his team needed him to be. So because of that, I think people underrated him a little, just because he couldn't fulfill the role that the team demanded. But I think he's a good fit on KT.
Okay. Because my opinion of him was that he was a very interesting rising player when he left the Jin Air Stealths, and I really liked watching him play, and his TF was quite good, and I think he could be definitely an upgrade off of Nagne. It's just I haven't seen much of his play in the last year, so I don't really have a good opinion on that at this precise moment.
Yeah, I think it's a good move, for sure.
So as I was clicking around on Esportspedia, Monty, you know, every now and then, one of the things I've always loved about the Chinese players is that they all change their name all the time. So here's one you probably haven't heard of, Monty. Do you know what Conan actually changed his name to?
No.
You'll like this one.
The
His
WWE
name...
player?
Yeah, he actually changed his name to Love Cry Boy.
That was, his old name. So
Why not? I mean, I've got here's a next level move. Why doesn't PYL change his name to that? There we go. It always comes full circle, Kelsey. We always get back to the memes. See, time is a flat circle. So, let me see. Is there anything else in Korea that we need to do? Let's see who else there was. I think that's almost everyone. What do you actually think, Monty, of Athena as a player? What did you think of him on Ever?
We talked about him a little bit. I think he's okay. Why are we talking about Athena now? We've talked about him a lot.
Just was, mate.
his Varus was interesting.
Did we actually talk, Monty? I can't remember if I brought it up to you on By the Numbers. I guess we'll do it now. I think I mentioned to you that I saw Clement make a tweet where he said, oh, the Gamma Bears have got a new sponsor, and their new sponsor is Gcash. So you know what I was thinking? Oh, okay. Maybe call themselves Gcash Bears. Nah. See, what you got to do is consolidate and bring it. Remember, you're speaking Mandarin, so obviously what you got to do is get to them as few letters as you can. That's their thing. Okay, in fact, if possible, get all vowels out entirely. But anyway, so they decided to call themselves Gash Bears. Now, in the UK,
in everywhere, it's not just the UK.
Okay, but if you say I'm getting myself some gash, that means pizza. If you know all the references to the show, that means a woman's delicate petal that unfolds like a lily. And yeah, you know what I'm talking about there. So here's the point, Monty. I don't know if I mentioned this part to you, though. Not only did they name themselves Gash Bears, did I tell you about the color change?
The pink? Yes.
They've also changed their team colors from orange to pink.
Qualify for the LPL or LMS in the end? Didn't that happen? So we're not even actually going to see them, right?
Ah, yes, they lost the promotion match. You're right.
Yeah. Who did they lose to?
To Yo LMS.
What the fuck?
Yeah, I had that. Clement explained that that Taiwanese meme there to me, where they apparently Yo is again, and
they also have a player called Yo apparently who's the captain. So
yeah, I
this
think
can't be
he
real as well.
Originated it. So
you ready, Monty? Here's another area that doesn't even make sense. So the top laner of Yo LMS, top laner, his alias is Poppy. He shouldn't even be allowed to play. He should be fucking banned right now. That's toxicity, just even being called that. Just being triggered by seeing the name Poppy enter every single time Champ Select. Shouldn't be allowed. But yeah.
yeah.
I think that's the end of the show. Is there anything else? No, wait. There's got to be one more thing. Let me think. There's got to be one more thing. Oh, I forgot. Didn't Peanut join...
Coup, yes.
Coup.
Yes.
There we go. Is that significant, right, Monty? A half-decent jungler has joined the team?
Well, he's a very raw jungler too, and we haven't actually seen much Peanut because he didn't get much playtime on Najin over the course of the year. And when he did, he reminds me a lot of Swift in the early days, where he's very impressive mechanically. He will get a bunch of kills and then proceed to throw the game by himself.
Also Swift now.
Also Swift now, yes, that's very true. Swift hasn't changed that much, that's true. But in any case, yeah, I think that Peanut is still very young, but has a lot of work to do. But I also think that Nofe is an excellent coach, and him being a former jungler himself will probably help out Peanut a lot. But if we look objectively at it, a lot of the early game weakness that the Tigers had was due to Hojin's really lackluster early game jungling. Hojin was fine at team fighting and making those kind of calls, but he just didn't have any power in the early game. And adding Peanut makes their early game much more aggressive. And I'm curious to see how that looks, because it's going to be a big change for them. I'm excited by the Coup Tigers, though. You know that Prey is currently #1 in Korean solo queue? Prey may be back in a really big way, actually. He's #1 in Korean solo queue with a 73% win rate, which is absolutely insane for Korean solo queue.
That's a comforting trend.
Yeah, it is. Very comforting trend. But just to put this in perspective, I'm looking right now at the solo queue ladder, and in the top 100 players, there's only one other player that has a 73% or even above 70% win rating, and that's the 94th ranked player on the ladder. So that's incredible for a solo queue win rate in Korea.
Yeah. One of my top 20 Worlds players, just in case anyone forgot. So I get to just say that shit for like one more year now. I've got a whole year of run on that one. So, okay, there's a few EU things I wanted to talk about, actually. First of all, after watching IEM, Kelsey, what do you think of H2K's chances? Because I just as a caveat for everyone who knows, just so you can see the sort of trend of Kelsey's predilections. So the same reason she liked Koro 1, basically, she's never bothered making this analogy, but Odoamne is obviously the European Koro 1, so she was immediately drawn to him and relates to him on many deep levels, and so I'm expecting she'll think good things for H2K. What do you think of H2K?
I do think H2K will be good. I think they're playing a bit like Spring SK Gaming, which isn't necessarily bad, especially in the current meta. I think that though the good thing about this is that I think their top and mid are a bit more reliable. One of the things I really want to highlight on this roster is because they do have pretty self-sufficient solo laners. Yankos has the ability to kind of choose the lanes he wants to gank and free up some of the better things about him that were great in 2014, which was that he was really unpredictable in terms of where he would go. So that was something I think we lost a little bit in 2015 when Rocket fixated on Nuxx. So I think that this is a really positive thing for H2K.
I like the way you spun that,
So-
actually, because here's the thing. That's a good model you've got going there. You looked at what the pattern was to what went on. Here's the genius of what we didn't realize about Jankos. You could never know what lane he was going to gank in 2014 because all the laners were trash. So there was no obvious person he'd go and help. So he was free to do whatever he wanted. But when they actually got a good laner, well, we all know where it's going. So I like that. You've given me some... I mean, I know that's exactly what you said translated through my lens, but
Yes,
okay,
yes.
continue on anyway.
So I think that that's a positive thing. People will say that the obvious lane to gank is bottom, which I agree with. But at the same time, again, if we look at Spring SK Gaming, Svenskeren had a lot of freedom. He didn't necessarily just camp bot. So I think that same model can be repeated. So I'm looking forward to watching H2K develop.
Did I tell you this story, Monty, about Jankos and Vander? I can't remember if I told you it on By the Numbers. The story about them talking shit to Nukeduck about when they beat him in the promotion tournament.
No.
I don't think I did. Okay, so as I was doing my reflections interview with Nukeduck, because obviously a pivotal moment in his career was when the NIP team, which looked very strong on paper, lost to what was then KMT, which became Roccat, and obviously later became a good team, but at the time weren't supposed to win that game, and they won 3-0. I said to Nukeduck, almost naively, because I thought, you know, a lot of players don't talk about the past, they won't bring up anything. I said to him, did Jankos and Vander ever sort of like needle you with that? Like, did they ever bring up, you know, when they beat you? And he went like... Yeah, pretty much all the time. They're always coming up with new banter on that. And then he just said, particularly Vander, especially after he's had his first coffee of the day, which is like, that's great in itself. It's the idea that once Vander gets that first coffee in him, he's like, right, remember that time we whipped your ass and came to you? He's like, yeah, all right, mate, we can play the game now. I'm not finished there. Got some new ones for you, new banter. Got some new banter for you, lads. Brilliant. So, see what I've stooped to, Monty? I don't have any more Ryu stories, so now it's just about... Oh,
Well,
I did...
okay, we'll have to ask.
Yeah, what will the name be?
That he signed with H2K for more juicy Ryu.
Okay, so
stories.
there has to be a name, though, for the Vander stories then. So before it was Lily Ryu did that, so for Vander it's going to have to be like, oh, Vander has a personality? That's going to be the trend there. And any stories I get, I'll give you the money. Oh, there was a Ryu did that, actually. Are you ready?
Oh,
Here's
yeah.
what it was. I've got to find his Twitter, though, to find out what it was. But there was one. It wasn't bad, actually, Mike. You'll like it. So let's see. H2K Ryu. I think it's Ryu, right? Yeah, okay. Let's find out where it is. Because this is what's great about this, Monty, is it works on many levels. So, let's see. Okay, here we go. So, when he was at home, Jankos, the day before Christmas, Christmas Eve, posted a picture of himself and his dog. And it said, Merry Christmas, everyone, from me and dog. And then Odoamne said, nice dog, bring it to Ryu. And then Ryu said, yes, give me. So, there we go. Just playing on the stereotype about his own country that they eat dogs.
Wow.
Great, isn't it? And so, brilliant, isn't it? And then obviously my joke would be, that doesn't look like Keen. But anyway, that's enough of that. So, there's another one, Monty, I realised we didn't talk about last week, but that's probably because I was in denial. I was at the stage in the hierarchy of, you know, I was in the denial stage. I didn't want to believe it was true. So you ready for a line I never wanted to say, Monty? Diamond Prox has joined Unicorns of Love. I'm done. I'm out. I want to get off Mr. Toad's wild ride now, mommy. Like, what? Diamond Prox has joined Unicorns of Love. By the way, Monty, Power of Eagle isn't on Unicorns of Love anymore. There's nothing on Unicorns of Love for him. In fact, his mid lane is now Fox. So
You know what?
the lineup
If
is...
I was
yeah.
Diamond Prox, I have no idea why he wouldn't just join a challenger team. In all seriousness.
Well, the joke is he should just go join a CIS team and then get into Worlds.
No,
See
you
what I
should do
did
that.
there?
You should join a challenger team and then actually just qualify for the LCS, because Unicorns of Love, oh god, I mean that roster. If they had to stick with Gilius after their showing at IEM San Jose, it would have been a train wreck.
No one sticks with Gilius, mate. Gilius is that guy that you sleep with as a rebound where you think you've got over your old love and you're like, oh, well, no better way to get over someone than get under someone. Then when you sleep with him, you go, oh, this is a big mistake. I'm not ready for a relationship now. Listen, I'm sorry that came on you so strong last night. Like, and then you delete their number and then you're like, I'm sorry, who is this? And that's Gilius, unfortunately. So the lineup is Vizicachi top lane, same one from before. Diamond Prox jungle, Fox mid lane, Steel back, good old Steel back. He's in the LCS again, stealing checks again. He's playing AD carry. I like the way I said that, he's playing AD carry. Well, he's trying to. And Hilla Sang remains the support player. What do you think of this overall lineup, Monty? It's not going to be the worst team, right? It could be okay.
Well, I think that the addition of Diamond Prox really is going to help them out. But based on the performance they put in IEM San Jose, who knows? Who knows?
Kelsey, as an expert on Europe, what do you think of this lineup?
And theoretically, they massively downgraded their mid, and they slightly upgraded their bottom, and they have a jungler, which they didn't really have for a good part of last summer. They kind of had someone who went in and out. So I think just looking at the depth of the rosters that aren't like Fnatic and H2K and Vitality, right? They'll probably still be a middle of the pack team, but I don't think they're going to be a top team by any means.
Well, I mean, obviously, you're right. It's going to need Diamond Prox to shine like a glittering Chaos Emerald, as if he were. And Fox is there, so that's like Tails out of that. And here's the thing about this team. Obviously, there's a lot of EU teams.
And Origin.
My doorbell's ringing. Give me a second.
Forgot to mention Origin, but I think they're probably the best team right now. So.
Okay. So the thing is, obviously, a lot of EU teams are a mixture of nationalities, but I think this has to be one of the most train wreck lineups. Because think about this. There's a Hungarian guy, a Russian guy, a Swedish guy, a French guy, and a Bulgarian guy. That's a fucking train wreck there. That's a disaster waiting to happen.
I can't necessarily comment on that one way or the other, so I guess we'll have to see how it pans out.
Just have to see, won't we? Okay, what was the other one there was? Let me see. Okay, so there's... Did we talk about Vitality, Monty?
No. Wait, did we?
I can't remember. What do you think, Kelsey? What do you think of the Vitality lineup? It seems like quite... Here's the thing. Most people seem quite hyped about this now. I'm surprised by how excited people are. To me, there's a lot of question marks in it still, especially in a region that has H2K, Fnatic, Origin... I'm surprised people are so.
Yeah, but they can still make playoffs, though. That's right.
Sure,
Europe is extremely top heavy right now.
You know I like them top heavy, Monty. So anyway,
I know you do.
Come on, Kelsey. We haven't even brought Clear up this episode.
Exactly. So, yeah, I think or to me is potentially like the clear number one team right now. Afterwards, I think Fnatic has a lot of issues as well that they'll have to work out. So I think Vitality and Fnatic might be in the same boat in that regard. Vitality, my issue is that just like I feel like Shook has been really, really inconsistent. He's one of those players that people really like because he has very obvious high ceilings in games where he'll just run off with it, but then he'll just have games where he's not impressing at all. So that's my big concern. I also don't really know much about how their soul lanes are going to do. I don't know. There are a lot of questions for Vitality, but I do think that they're easily like a top 4 team just because of how top heavy Europe is. So
well who else is it going to be, right? Unicorns of Love not looking great. Who is even on Elements and Roccat right now?
No one knows. Oh, Rocket has weren't they the ones who signed his shit lineup?
They haven't officially announced their lineup yet, but it's been...
I don't think it was good. There
was an article posted about it, so...
I don't even know. I didn't see it.
Yeah, what was their lineup, the rumoured one? It wasn't good, right? I'm having a look now.
I know it involved Ubis and I think Edward.
Oh, Edward and
right.
Jeebus.
Yeah. Edward.
Yeah, well, Monty doesn't like to think about that Jeebus guy, but okay, keep going.
I can't remember if it was Betsy.
I think it could be, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was Betsy.
Who was the top laner, though?
Was it Freddy?
Oh, could be, yeah. Freddy122, I think I might be right. Who was the jungler then?
Kickers? I don't remember the jungler.
Could it be Kickers?
I don't think it was Kickers.
Let me put this in here. Let's see. Here we go. Yeah, I found it here. Right. So the lineup was. Yep, Freddie 122. Oh, Airwax.
Oh, okay.
Former Copenhagen Wolves player and substitute of Unicorns Love. Not even the fucking starter of Unicorns Love as a jungler. That's like, are you even a jungler? Let me see your papers, sir. Yes, Betsy is the mid laner, and then Edward and Jeebus is the bot lane, supposedly. That lineup doesn't look very good. The coach is apparently Yamato Cannon. Pause.
I guess it really depends, but I don't think they'll be relegated, so I guess there's that going for them.
There are 10 spots. You're right. There are 10 spots. So here's Monty. I can't believe I missed this. Here's a great one. There's been a challenger team made, Monty. That is beautiful. This is like, this team should be called Abomination. When I tell you the lineup, you won't even believe this is real. That someone actually said, I'd like to pay my money to see this team play in real life. And I put all my hopes and dreams on it. Are you ready for the lineup, Monty? Top lane, Whirly B. You remember? He was in Giants.
Yep.
Top lane, Whirly B.
Whirlin.
Jungle, Santorin. Ye of the 9.5 mechanics. Mid lane, Godbro. Former top laner of Copenhagen Wolves in LCS split spring 2013. Mid lane, AD carry, Holy Phoenix, Turkish player. Support player, you're probably thinking, who could round out a lineup like that of all stars? It's Jusui Cass. Jusui Cass, literally. That's not even a joke. That would be a funny joke if I said it was Jusui Cass. It's actually Jusui Cass. Now that's a fucking shit show right there, Monty.
Which team is this?
This is a team called Hummer.
Oh,
and it's
the
actually
challenger team.
Dentist's team.
Yeah,
now, what's
yeah.
great is, the only thing I thought was notable is when I saw the name Hummer, I thought of the Honeymooners, and I was like, Hummer. Again, reference game incredibly on point, but you have to have been alive in the 1960s to understand what I'm talking about. So, again,
Just
no
like
one does,
you.
Monty.
You're a timeless vampire, actually.
Unlike China's totalitarian government, Monty, I acknowledge the possibility of time travel and embrace it. See?
I mean, Holy Phoenix will probably just be rated as such because he is a Turkish player, but I think Holy Phoenix could actually be somewhat decent. So
I think so too, actually.
I think you're fondly remembering the first game where Dark Passage played them at the 2014 Worlds at EDG, and you're like, it was actually like winning early on or something. Have I got to the source here?
That's obviously the reason why I think that, yes.
Okay. See?
No. But I do think that him going to Europe to at least try to do something is the most logical next move of his career, because I do think he probably outperforms his region. So
the best part is every time Forgiven got emo and said he was going to leave LCS and like not sign with a team, he would always like almost like threaten me by going, I'll just go and play in Turkey, as if like that was like his like, I'm going to my room, like I'm not coming out, fuck you guys, like I'm just going to play in Turkey. And I was like, don't do that, just retire or play in LCS. It doesn't make any sense to go fucking Turkey, does it? Although I think I did tell him, but I could see why you'd probably understand it, because that also seems like just as bad a country as Greece. And some people can take these sorts of comments, Monty. Not everyone has to get upset. Sometimes it's okay to tell someone to their face their country's terrible and you don't respect it. You know? We all do it. We all do it. But I'm the only one honest enough to do it on camera. So anyway, in NA, we had an interesting development, Monty. We don't have to go super deep on it, because obviously there have been 700 pieces of content. But Ember, Challenger team, released their salaries, and their salaries are enormous compared to EULCS teams. What did you think of this, Monty? I mean, players, I think the minimum they were earning with bonuses was 70,000.
Didn't you just have your brand new esports salon show talk about this?
But you're not on that, Monty. So what do you think?
I was never invited.
Listen, checks in the mail and all that. So anyway. Okay, so what do you think?
I think that it is absurd to be listing salaries when we're in the middle of a VC bubble right now, because would be very cautious about giving out that kind of information. First off, people are going to say it's for the good of the players and the transparency. I mean, the players are already getting paid well due to the jump in salaries. And I liked Mylixia's statement on it, the CEO of CLG, about that particular situation. I think it's good that the players are being paid well, but at the same time, paying those particular players that amount of money is unnecessary and only further inflates the scene. And Ember is an organization with VC, venture capital, and zero sponsors and zero sustainability. And I think with that roster is a team that is unlikely to make it into the LCS in the first place. So I'm not exactly sure what they're trying to show off here. Are they trying to show off that they are, in my opinion, wantonly spending money?
I'll give you an interesting counterpoint.
What is their end game here?
So here's an interesting counterpoint that I got from my show, actually, Esports Salon, Thorin YouTube channel, which is, I hadn't thought of it this way, but this actually does make sense. So let's add up their total salaries, and it's probably going to be around $300,000, okay? I think that's roughly what it was for their salary. Here's an interesting point for you. Since it currently costs $1 million or so to buy an LCS spot, they could actually fail and get in next year, and they still wouldn't have spent as much as they would to buy an LCS spot.
That's true, but they also can't get any sponsors as a challenger team. Most
It'd be hard for sure.
So they can't even defray their expenses on that. Perhaps they could make more money in the long run being an LCS team immediately. I think what's likely what happened is they realized that if they had put together an LCS team and if they had bought that slot, then they would have been relegated. So then they decided to go into the challenger because it's lower risk. I also want to point out that for those salaries, there's a possibility that Ember as a team, despite what they're saying right now, could just pay 3 months of those players' salaries, make it into the LCS, sell the LCS slot, having only paid out 3 months of their players' salaries, and then just give the contracts, just hand them on over to somebody else who's going to pay them $1 million and then pay out the rest of the operating expenses, right? Buy out the contracts themselves, along with the team slot. There's nothing to say they won't do that.
Sure.
Also, one thing I think that is worth bringing up is just that if you publish the player salaries or not, I feel like this is still, it's not going to affect whether or not the inflated salaries happen. So really you're just discussing whether or not the public perception of it matters, because I think we're on this course right now and we can't really slow down what's happening regardless, and it's just going to be a part of the industry's growth whether or not it's healthy or not. So
see, something I actually found interesting though is that when you're in this situation, let me think what my point was going to be there. So it was about the salaries, people getting LCS spots. What was it going to be? I'll have to circle back on that one.
I mean, the whole thing, though, is basically this was just a PR move for Ember saying we support the North American and Canadian players, and this is what we pay, and look how high it is, which it is very high for a challenger team, right? I actually don't think it's very high for an LCS team in North America right now.
Yeah.
I think that if we look at teams like TSM and Immortals and Energy, they all have significantly higher salaries than that. That's not really...
So here's the crazy one, Monty. I can't go into much...
now?
Okay.
Go for it.
Finish the point then?
No, I'm done.
Okay. So the point I was going to make was, if you think that's bad for inflated salaries, there is a team that will pay in Challenger this season more than any LCS team in the world in salary.
What?
That will happen. It's a bunch of people behind the scenes of different sources have all corroborated this individually. There's some team, I can't say who they are, who have an insane amount of money that they're going to spend in Challenger, believe it or not. That's why actually there were some players considering, should I go into LCS in EU, or should I actually just take money and go only to Challenger in NA and just cash out massively? So if you think inflation's bad at the moment, some of the fees are insane right now.
Well, I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because who would the Challenger team even get right now?
I know, it's crazy, right?
It's the Ember conundrum of what kind of roster can we actually put together in Challenger?
I mean, I think their notion is, like, because they're going to pay something, they're hoping they can snag some, say, a top EU player or someone like that. And
yeah, but they still have to, at the end of the day, they still have to have 3 NA players.
Sure. Listen, I'm not saying it's a good plan. I'm not advocating it. I'm not a representative of this team, by the way. I'm just saying it exists. So, I mean, put it this way, I don't imagine that team will be disclosing their salary amounts. And if I get in a situation where we can reveal it at some point, hopefully it comes out in an interview at some point. Someone will slip eventually. I know some player will slip, reveal it, and then we can discuss it officially. But
I mean, there's there are myriad reasons not to disclose the player salaries, and is it really surprising that the team?
I mean, you don't have to for a start off.
Yeah, but you don't. And I honestly think that most players, at least, I don't know what EU's like right now, but I think most players in NA are getting paid comparably to what the Ember players, if not more. And the players also know what each other. It's not like they don't talk to each other about what they're making. That's a whole load of bullshit.
Well, that's why Uzi hated Insec, because he knew he was making more money than him.
Yeah, and they do talk about it. Would I like things to be more transparent? Absolutely. But at a certain point, it's actually detrimental to the industry, because what do sponsors come and look at when they see these kind of salary numbers go out and we don't see the same kind of revenue coming in? It's very obviously a bubble, and certainly venture capital is used to aggressively expand. And most venture capitalists or angel investors know that they're going to be coming in for a loss in the first 2 years. But why are these VC guys coming in? The answer is because they're assuming that Coca-Cola and Nike and Reebok and Adidas and the big non-endemic sponsors are going to be coming in within the next year or two. And I think they will, but we don't know that for certain yet, and it could take longer, it could be shorter, it could happen tomorrow. But the point is that there's not a good return. You basically cannot run a team at a profit at this point in time if you want to remain competitive. It's actually impossible. It's actually impossible, because Razer and these endemic sponsors are just not, peripheral sponsors are not going to pay you enough money to cover those kind of salaries. They're not.
But here's the thing, Monty.
They don't do it. I can tell you, I own a team, it doesn't happen.
Just stream on you.
Exactly. So here's the thing. Everything's not black and white, Monty. Like, sometimes something bad happens, but something good comes out of it. So, for example, a lot of people consider the Nazis to have been a bad thing in history. But I think the triumph of the will is an excellent piece of art that came out of it. Obviously, was a lot. Wagner was associated with it, so great art can come out of it.
Before people can start getting mad, that's actually a pretty common opinion in film history, that movie actually changed a lot about
it's a great movie. Yeah. So it's obviously propaganda, but it's a great movie if you can consider it just a movie. So there was a piece of wonderful content came out of this revelation, Monty, because if you remember, it wasn't just a list of salaries. There was also sort of a manifesto on life and the gaming industry, and a lot of wisdom actually there, Monty. So I'd just like to read some of this out to you and see what you think as a fellow team owner. So the title was Better Humans Become Better Athletes. Pretty bold opening gambit there, right? I just
that whole announcement was so fucking ridiculous. Like, the language, and just reading the AMA after it too. I don't know if you saw this, but there's an Ember AMA on the subreddit right now, where people are literally asking, like, do you actually mean that a North American will win Worlds within 2 years' time? And the answer to this is, like, here's Mr. Bao Lam's High's brothers, who owns this team's answer. I wholeheartedly believe that NA will win Worlds within 2 years' time, assuming that we catch up to the standards of the rest of the industry in terms of infrastructure. Do you honestly believe that Koreans or any other import possess some kind of special ability that makes them innately better at League of Legends? It's not like traditional sports where someone is actually taller, faster, or stronger than you. I think if you look at something like SC2, that it might be harder to imagine, as SC2 is almost all purely mechanical and individual skill. I don't think LoL requires significant mechanical and individual skill. It does to an extent, and that's what solo queue is for. That's what the difference between Beard Faker and the random challenger mid is. Overall, I don't think individual and mechanical skill have quite as high an impact as people tend to believe. I think consistency is important, I think communication is important, and I think attitude is extremely important. LoL games are won by macro-level movements and rotations with players that can perform the micro-level movements at a professional level.
This is killing me, by the way.
In my opinion, all of this can be taught.
Do you want to know the best part about that, Monty?
My experiment will be tested. So the first question this brings up is, okay, if your theory is correct and all of this can be taught, then why is Korea so dominant still? Basically, you're just explaining different reasons why Korea is dominant, because they are better at coaching, having that infrastructure. And my question to this guy is, okay, if you plan on creating a similar level of infrastructure, can you please describe to me what exactly it is about the Korean infrastructure? What do teams do differently than NA? Can you cite some specific example? Because this guy right now seems like he's talking about out of his ass. He needs to say, what does SK Telecom do? And what is it about that environment that creates a better macro game, right? Because it's undoubted from the World Championship, he's not wrong, but he's just deflecting the question without actually adding what the fuck Ember is going to do to solve this. Because in my opinion, as a coach and as a team owner, this is the big problem, is how do you solve this question? Right?
I actually asked them on their AMA, what steps are you going to take to sort of, quote unquote, like have NA talent catch up to Korean? And he said,
that's the obvious question.
If I revealed that, it would give away our competitive advantage.
Okay,
shit.
Was the answer.
Shit. Can't tell you the secret sauce, Monty.
Oh, wow. Well, I guess, man, he must know more than everybody who's been in the scene for many years. He must have some sort of secret sauce, like, that is there on the side that he is just ready to slather all over his team. What kind of answer is that? Like, honestly, this team is just so patently ridiculous.
By the way, let me just explain to someone, before we get into any of the issues of like League of Legends aspect, his analogy for StarCraft 2 is almost entirely wrong based on my understanding of StarCraft 2. Here's the key thing. StarCraft 2 compared to Brood War is significantly less mechanically intensive.
It is, of course.
And here's the key thing about StarCraft 2. It actually is almost entirely based around a couple of key decisions you make. Like the build and all that sort of stuff is one thing, but it's usually about picking the right fight at the right time of the game. That sounds kind of like a macro game in League of Legends almost. Not only that, there were a number of champions in StarCraft 2 who had much weaker mechanics than players they beat. For example, MMA was quite a slow mechanical player, actually. There were players who had double his APM who weren't better than him. It actually wasn't a particularly mechanical RTS game even. Games like Warcraft 3, games like Brood War, considered to be mechanically more demanding games because the micro was more important in those games. The units weren't as intelligently AI pathed, etc. So what's funny is he actually has picked exactly the wrong example, because StarCraft 2 Koreans are better for the same reasons League of Legends Koreans are. They're better at decision making, understanding of the macro game and the flow of what to do next. Because there were Westerners who had good mechanics, but they always had the strategical lag behind what the Korean would do.
I mean, I'm just reading these answers. For your question, there were two answers from, I guess, their GM and also their owner. So their owner said, I can't go into too much detail because I think it's our competitive advantage. Honestly, providing a stable environment is huge. The other stuff is secret. Okay, well, lots of teams provide stable environments. And the other guy says, I also think we're entering a very strong age for strategic support staff. When esports started expanding in infrastructure in 2014, we saw a lot of flavor of the month people join the scene wanting to do work because they thought it would be fun. It's a lot of work. If you're a coach/staff and you aren't willing to work harder than your players, you're in the wrong field. So we'll be having high expectations of everyone, and our schedule is very intensive compared to other CS teams. It's very comparable to LCS schedules. I mean, having just run a challenger team into the LCS, I can tell you we had virtually an identical schedule to LCS teams. The whole thing about Ember is that they keep saying, like, this is some revelation, we're doing something new, but they're really not. Like, teams that come out of challenger and make LCS have pretty much all done that. Look at Origin. You think they were not running an LCS schedule with former LCS players? That's absurd. I mean, Renegades, we were all in a house together, like all the team members were in a house with our manager, with our coach. Everyone was living there, very comparable schedule to LCS. There really wasn't a lot of difference.
I've got a couple of great quotes here.
What the fuck is this team actually doing that's different in the end, right? And it's fine. I don't want them to do poorly, but what I object to is when these people come into esports like the second coming of Jesus Christ and pretend that they've got all these secrets when literally they've got nothing besides a bunch of hot air that they're blowing.
Here's a good one for you, Monty, because this is like some next level middle management speech. Are you ready? It says, you can only compete against others or against yourself. While both have value, we prefer to focus on competing against ourselves. See, he's not only going to beat the Koreans, Monty, he's going to do it Mighty Duck style. They're going to focus on themselves. They're going to invent their own meta, and then when they go to Worlds, which they're obviously going to Worlds, Monty, that goes without saying, they're gonna do it. Here's another great point that a lot of people missed, because this is really interesting, because if they change their strategy and get Koreans in, they fucked themselves from before. So here's a part a lot of people missed, Monty. They have a section where they talk about how they believe in regional talent, and they literally say at the end that they've got all players from NA. Why? Because we have pride in our region, in our countries. God. and in our talent. Get ready. Made in NA, US, and Canada. That's something we believe in, and we're putting our money on it.
Central America doesn't count.
I guess not.
Plus, if I'm being honest, Monty, it's kind of hard to get those work visas. Just saying, mate. I come to play a video game. Yeah, well, listen. If we kicked Broken Shard out the country, who actually comes from Israel, I don't think you're getting in, mate. Sorry. Anyway,
I just don't get it. Why would you come in here with this level of press releases? I understand why they want to release the player salaries, but there's a way to do that. And the way to do that isn't this self-aggrandizing, masturbatory tone that they've taken. And even asking, Kelsey asking a question like that is perfectly legitimate, but basically they're just saying, oh, it's a secret. Okay, so you're telling me that you have figured out how the Koreans have won all of these things and that NA is going to win within 2 years. Maybe you're right. I don't know that, but to make that kind of statement does seem just absolutely nuts at this point in time when NA can, I mean, they can't even really do anything at this point in time properly.
It's also not a statement that makes sense on its surface. So think about this. If he'd said Ember will win the Summoners Cup in 2 years, that would actually, believe it or not, be a more respectable statement, because it would mean I know something about my team, what we're going to do, and how we're going to win. Why is he taking all of NA to win the Summoner Cup? What, does he know something about the other teams and who they'll have on them in 2 years from now? That seems like the premise of that doesn't even really work. Also, why are you picking the other team? I need everyone's help. Obviously not just my team can win, but the others will all figure out the secret as well.
I mean, we're talking about a region that couldn't even get a team into the quarterfinals in Worlds.
It's true. On a scale of 0 to 10, how bad was that second week for NA?
It's just
there we go.
And maybe here's the plausible way. Okay, let's say that, for example, an NA team does win the World Championship. The question is within the next 2 years. Okay. It's not happening this year. The question
let's accept the premise.
Does that team even have any NA players on it?
And do we still breathe oxygen, or is the surface of the Earth like molten lava at that point? I need to know all the factors here, Marty.
But seriously, maybe they will. But in 2017, because a lot of these players that we were talking about in the show go NA, foreign players, you don't have to have a single NA player on your team in 2017.
You know what he's done, Monty? He's pulled a loco. He's going to be right. In 2017, NA wins the cup with a team of
Faker
GBM. Yeah, it's going to be all the really good players, basically. And he's pulled a loco because technically he was right, and then we have to call him Emperor Bao at that point in time.
It's like Emperor Bao, but it's like let's see here. So, okay, I'll make a team: Impact, Rush, Faker, Piglet, Gorilla. There, that could be an NA team next year, seriously.
And then they win Worlds. Here's the other thing I don't get as well, because just as an aside, I didn't really get. I thought the first part didn't hang together well because of the title. Like it said, we believe that better humans become better athletes. Now, here's the key thing: you got to be consistent with your knowledge here. Okay, so if that's real wisdom, then you're actually deducing that Koreans are better human beings than Westerners. That's literally what you're essentially stating, by the way.
It just sounds like the...
Just saying.
Are we humans or are we gamer?
And not only that, surely you should be seeking to find out what's made Koreans better humans. Forget the macro game. What are they doing to make themselves better humans?
I mean, the logical flaws of this are just absolutely mind-blowing.
But anyway, I thought we'd end on a high note. We'd all just go out with some fun.
We ended on a bow note, actually. Wrong land.
Maybe you will bow before him in 2 years, Monty, when his team indeed does win Worlds. Although, by the way, he also technically didn't say they'd win Worlds. He just used a kind of euphemism by saying they would kiss the Summoners Cup. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Dominate. Dominate comes through with some good lines every now and then, Monty. I think it was either Dominate or Xpecial. And when I said that thing on Twitter about them kissing the Summoners Cup, he just said something like, well, I'm sure we could sneak a kiss in here or there. Just say, I think that's pretty good, actually. That's not bad. Even that's as reasonable as you can be at that point in time. So, right, I think that's the end of the show. Do you have any final words, Kelsey?
Nope.
Go to your Facebook, look at stuff, read things, enjoy them.
Sounds good.
Embrace China. Believe in Name.
I don't know.
Don't fuck too many fans.
Decision next year to embrace China, but we'll do embrace Edward Gaming. That's the
okay. Embrace Edward Gaming.
There we go.
Thanks to Alpha Draft.